Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Su Xinqi. On July 4, 2009, several lecturers from the finance department of a Chinese university gathered to work overtime to manage and monitor the school's finances and expenses from the previous semester. One lecturer, Tam Xingfai, 43, was scheduled to attend but was missing. At 11 a.m., a colleague named Ma tried to call Xingfai's cell phone but received no response. Despite the heavy workload, Ma was not too worried at first. He thought Xingfai might be taking care of his family's dog, which had a skin disease. Xingfai had planned to take the dog to the vet, so Ma assumed that was where he was. On July 5th, the university's finance department held a meeting, but Xingfai failed to attend for the second time. Ma tried calling his cell phone again, but no one answered. Unfortunately, Ma did not have Xingfai's home phone number, so he could not contact him that way. By July 6th, Xingfai had been absent from work for 2 days and had not contacted any of his colleagues. Eventually, one of his colleagues reported the situation to the finance department. Xingfai's supervisors had his home landline number, so they called there, but like his cell phone, no one answered. They called the library where his 33-year-old wife, Han Tong Yen, worked. Library staff confirmed that she had also been absent from work without permission. The couple lived in Zhongshan, Guangdong Province, China, and had been married for 11 years. They have 2 daughters, the eldest, Tam Hu-man, 10, and the youngest, Tam Hu-wing, 7. Despite their financial difficulties and living in an abandoned recycling station on Huazhu South Road, they are known to be kind, cheerful, and positive people with well-behaved children. Xingfai often takes his daughters into town to have fun, leading some to believe that the family went on vacation together. However, something unexpected happened that prevented them from returning home. His colleagues spent quite a while trying to contact him by calling both his cell phone and his home phone, hoping to reach him. Finally, someone answered, but instead of a family member, it was a middle-aged man who was a stranger. The man claimed to be Xingfai's cousin and said that the family had gone to Dongguan, Guangdong Province, China for the summer vacation. He said that Xingfai had entrusted his phone to him for safekeeping. When asked when the family would return to Hong Kong, the man could not answer. After repeated inquiries, he hung up and turned off the phone. This call only added to the suspicion and anxiety of his colleagues towards Xingfai. Xingfai was always hardworking and responsible, never missing work without a good reason. If he planned to go on vacation with his children, he would make sure their schools were notified in advance. In addition, his family kept 9 stray dogs, raising concerns about who would take care of them if they traveled to the mainland and how they would be able to afford the trip to China. Previously, Xingfai lived with his parents. His father was a sailor and his mother worked at a paper mill. Unfortunately, his father went missing and was never found, which caused his mother to become ill and eventually end up in a nursing home. Xingfai's abandonment of her was considered completely out of character for him, especially since he visited her every week. They eventually decided to contact the police. One of Xingfai's co-workers led the police to Xingfai's house, which was located at an abandoned recycling station in Pingqi village. During their journey, they saw a short man through the fence of Xingfai's property. He quickly disappeared from sight, but they didn't think much of it and continued on. When they reached the gate of the house, they found that the door was locked. The police then inspected the property and interviewed the neighbors. The abandoned recycling station covers an area of nearly 450 square meters, of which only 90 square meters are built, leaving nearly 350 square meters as empty flower beds. The construction of the building was not permitted. The previous owner had built several corrugated iron sheds on the site for waste recycling. A stone house next door was used as a pig farm, and there were few residents in the area. As a result, the police were only able to question one neighbor, an elderly woman surnamed Wang, who lived alone across the street. She said she had lived in the area for a long time and was familiar with the family's routine, noting that they often spent their afternoons working in the garden. However, she had little information about their personal lives and commented that the family rarely had visitors due to the isolated nature of the site. The only relative who visited and contacted Xing Fai was Xing Fai's middle-aged cousin, Zhu Wang. Zhu Wang did not have much information about Xing Fai's family. He only knew that Xing Fai's cousin lived in a nearby stone house. Xing Fai's colleague informed the police that his call was answered by Zhu Wang, leading them to believe that he was the one on the other end of the line. However, Zhu Wang said that he did not know the address of Xing Fai or his cousin. Prior to these events, the police went to Xing Fai's house to investigate in Pingqi village. That same day, the police found a man at a stone house on Huazhu Road number 74. The man, Su Xingqi, 42, confirmed that he was Xing Fai's cousin. He said that he often went to Xing Fai's house to help with renovations and gardening. When asked about the phone call, he said that the family was in China for a vacation. On July 5, Xing Fai visited his mother at the nursing home. He then went home to tell Su about his plans to travel to Dongguan, China for a few days. Su explained that using Xing Fai's Hong Kong mobile phone in mainland China would incur high roaming charges, so he asked Su to keep the phone until he returned. The witness and Xing Fai's colleague who saw him running away was actually Zhu Wang, who had just finished feeding the family dog. Su appeared calm and there were no significant inconsistencies in his testimony. When the police asked Su if he had the keys to the family's house, he said no. The police continued to investigate the area. When the police questioned the villagers about Su, they discovered that he had been dishonest. Villagers confirmed that Su often went to the house to work and could open both the gate and the door himself, even when no one else was there. This suggested that he might have had a key to the house. In fact, he did have a key, as Zhu Wang saw Xing Fai hand the key to Su at the university office, asking Su to get the key for him. Later, when the police returned to Su's house to ask about the key, he denied having the key again. He claimed that he had used the spare key for renovations but had returned it, so he said he could not enter the house. During this interrogation, Su seemed much more nervous than during the first interrogation, and he deliberately avoided important details. When the police threatened to search his house, Su panicked and suddenly remembered that he actually had another house key that he had not returned. He then took the key from the closet and gave it to the police. Although Su's behavior was suspicious, there was no concrete evidence linking him to the family's disappearance, so the police decided to keep an eye on him while they continued their investigation. They used a spare key to enter Xing Fai's home, where they found the interior in disarray, suggesting a break-in. The police also found some fresh blood stains on the walls, suggesting that someone had been murdered in the house. In the kitchen, they found a sink full of dirty dishes, which raised doubts about the idea that the family had traveled to China, as they would not have left the house in such a state. In the couple's master bedroom, the police discovered the family's identity cards in the wardrobe. The police contacted the border office and confirmed that the family had never left Hong Kong. As they continued their search, officers found a bloody shirt in the next room and a bloody plastic water pipe in the corner of the room. Police deployed sniffer dogs to collect more evidence and were able to locate the missing family. The dogs picked up a scent, leading them to bloodstains found under the freshly dug soil. In addition, despite it being summer vacation, the couple's two children, Hiu Man and Hiu Wing, had enrolled in summer school, indicating that the family was not on vacation. A special task force was therefore set up to investigate the case. Police sealed off the scene and blocked the entrances to Pingqi village to outsiders while placing Su Xingqi under house arrest as the prime suspect. Su quickly confessed to the police. He revealed that he was from Huangpu in Guangdong province and usually lived with his sister, wife, and 2 sons, aged 15 and 16. He used to support himself by selling motorcycles in Junction City, but in 2006, Guangdong imposed a motorcycle ban, which led to a decline in sales. Faced with financial difficulties, he contacted Xing Fai in Hong Kong to seek help in finding a job in the city. Xing Fai helped Su get a construction job that paid 500 Hong Kong dollars a day, including food and accommodation. However, after working for 2 weeks, Su was unhappy because after deductions, he only received 220 Hong Kong dollars. Frustrated, he quit the job without notice and returned to China. In 2007, after Typhoon Pabuk severely damaged his house, Su returned to Hong Kong because the repair costs were too expensive. He asked Xing Fai to help him find another job in Hong Kong. When Xing Fai couldn't find another job, Su Xingqi offered to repair the house, do gardening, and do housework around Xing Fai's house. And Xing Fai would pay Su. Xing Fai agreed to the deal, so every 2 months, Su would come to Hong Kong to help with housework, mainly gardening and repairing the house. During this time, Su began to notice Helen Tong Yen, who was later discovered by Xing Fai. On July 3rd, Su arrived in Hong Kong. 2 days later, on July 5th, Xing Fai took Su to visit his mother at the nursing home. After the visit, Su sneaked out to go home first to harass Helen Tong Yen. However, Xing Fai came home earlier than expected and caught him. Enraged, Xing Fai rushed at Su. In a panic, Su grabbed a 25-centimeter-long fruit knife and stabbed Xing Fai, causing him to collapse in a pool of blood and die. Horrified by what he had just done, Su considered calling the police. However, he did not. Su then thought of a way to silence Xing Fai's wife, Helen Tong Yen, and prevent her from calling the police. Su grabbed some wire from the corner of the room and rushed towards her, knocking her to the ground and tying her hands behind her back. He then covered her mouth and nose with tape and put a plastic bag over her head. Meanwhile, the couple's 2 children were in the bedroom watching cartoons. Helen Tong Yen shouted for them to run away, but instead they ran towards her and found their father dead and Su attacking their mother. In fear, they ran back to their room, crying and locking the door. Since she was tied up, Su left Helen Tong Yen behind and chased after the children. Hearing the noise, Hiu Man and Hiu Ying saw Su holding a pair of pliers. He pried open the door and used more electric wires to attack both of them. He tied their hands behind their backs, taped their mouths and noses, and put plastic bags over their heads. After leaving the bedroom, he returned to find that both children had stopped breathing. Hiu Man and Hiu Ying suffocated shortly after. After killing the entire family, Su was at a loss for what to do next. He returned home to think things over. He felt that hiding the bodies in a ditch or pond would be too easy to discover, and that dismembering them would be tiring and time-consuming. Instead, he decided to bury the bodies in their own home. On July 6th, he returned home to clean up as much blood as possible. He then dug a hole deep and wide enough to fit the bodies of the 4 family members and quickly placed them inside. He also threw the murder weapon into the hole before filling it up. Although he was skeptical of his motives, the police accepted the rest of his testimony. They took Su back to the house, where he pointed out where a sharp knife, a water pipe, a pair of pliers, and other tools used in the crime were. The fire department was called to assist in exhuming the buried body. Firefighters arrived equipped with digging tools and gas masks, as the bodies were buried near a septic tank. They began digging but soon encountered a significant obstacle: they hit cement. Su had left out a crucial detail in his confession, pouring cement before covering it up. The firefighters could not determine the thickness of the cement, and since the cement had hardened, their tools were ineffective. The police then hired a private engineering company, which brought in specialized equipment to drill through the concrete slab. When the team drilled into the hole and discovered human hair, they panicked and refused to continue, fearing that they might reach the body. It took the police 13 hours to persuade them to continue. After digging, the hole was 2.54 meters wide and 6 feet deep. They finally discovered the bodies of a family, all barefoot and wearing only t-shirts and shorts. At the bottom was Xing Fai's body, his hands and feet tied with electric wire, with multiple stab wounds to his stomach, back, and neck, and his clothes soaked in blood. Human and Huing's mouths and noses were taped, their hands and feet were tied, and the children's faces looked distorted. Helen Tong Yan's condition was similar. Her face was distorted, her hands and feet were tied, her mouth and nose were covered, and her eyes were covered with transparent tape. Su Xingqi was arrested, and during interrogation, he admitted that he had flirted with a woman. She felt uncomfortable and informed Xing Fai about the incident. Xing Fai becomes angry and kicks Su out of their home, forbidding him from returning. On July 3rd, Su returned home to start work, and his relationship with his cousin seemed to have improved. However, on July 4th, he again behaved inappropriately towards Helen Tong Yan. While Xing Fai was away, Su attempted to molest her. She escaped and locked herself in her room while calling for help. Not wanting to attract the attention of the neighbors, Su angrily left the house. On July 5th, Su and Xing Fai went to the nursing home, but he left first. Anticipating this, Xing Fai returned home early and found Su at his home and was trying to get in to talk to Helen Tong Yan. An argument ensued, and in the heat of the moment, Su stabbed Xing Fai. The rest of his confession was consistent with his initial statement but added the detail that he had filled the makeshift grave with cement. However, after the bodies were sent for autopsy, it became clear that Su's testimony was false. Xing Fai's murder was much more brutal than Su had claimed. Xing Fai had been stabbed 9 times in the head and neck, nearly 80 times in the body, and 10 times in the arms and legs. Instead of being suffocated with a plastic bag, he had been strangled. Forensic investigations showed that the cutlery and dishes in the house did not contain the family's DNA, but did contain Su's DNA. The weapon Su used was not a family kitchen knife, but a knife he owned. Furthermore, the cement used to bury the body had been purchased before the murder, suggesting that the crime was premeditated. Police discovered that bank cards had been used at ATMs after the time of death, but could not be withdrawn due to repeated incorrect PIN entries. In addition, the victim's cash and bank cards were missing, suggesting robbery as the motive behind the crime. Whenever the police pointed out inconsistencies in Su's testimony, he would quickly come up with another explanation. He claimed that his ancestral home in China needed urgent repairs while his 2 children were in school and he needed $100,000 in cash to pay for it. During his visits to Hong Kong, he did not earn much money, which prompted him to seek help from Xing Fai. Su believed that Xing Fai was actually rich but acted like a miser, and he thought that the low wages he received while working for Xing Fai were because they were exploiting him as cheap labor. On July 3rd, Su returned to Hong Kong alone without informing anyone. He waits until July 5th, when Xing Fai has a day off from work. While Xing Fai is at the nursing home, Su, armed with a hidden knife, knocks on his door. When Xing Fai returns and finds Su there, he invites him to cook something while they talk. As soon as Su enters the kitchen, he suddenly asks to borrow 100,000 Hong Kong dollars. Xing Fai refuses and explains to Su that the money was for his mother's medical treatment and his children's education. Sue does not want to accept this answer and accuses Xing Fai of just wanting to use him as cheap labor. This accusation angers Xing Fai, and when Sue continues to press the issue, Xing Fai tells him to leave. As Xing Fai turns to leave, Sue lunges at him, covering his mouth before stabbing him in the back. He then threatened Hiu Man and Hiu Wing, ransacked the house for cash and bank cards, and demanded the card passwords. Xing Fai pretended to provide a fake password, which Sue did not realize was invalid at the time. Sue also lied about strangling the others and claimed that he killed them by covering their mouths and noses with tape and putting plastic bags over their heads. When Sue went to the nearest ATM, he discovered that he had been scammed because his PIN did not work. When he returned home, he discovered that people had suffocated while he was away. Seeing the food he had prepared, he decided to sit and eat next to the 4 corpses while thinking of what to do with them. After stealing 6,000 Hong Kong dollars from Xing Fai, he buried the corpses and the tools he used in a small hole before going to sleep at his stone house. The next morning, Sue realized that the smell from the buried corpses might give them away. To prevent this, he went to buy cement, dug up the hole, poured cement in it, and covered it up. He decided to stay at home for a while to answer any calls to Xing Fai's cell phone or home phone, telling anyone who asked that he was keeping an eye on things while they were away on vacation. Sue did not expect the deception to be discovered so quickly. Even then, he continued to lie about several details, including how he had purchased cement before the incident and the circumstances surrounding the victims' deaths. At that point, the police were no longer focused on obtaining a true confession, believing they had enough evidence to proceed. The trial took place in the Hong Kong High Court on October 28, 2010, where he pleaded not guilty. He claimed that his previous statement about having an affair with Helen Tong Yen was correct, asserting that he killed her in self-defense and that the deaths of Hiu Man and Hiu Wing were accidental. On November 23, the jury returned a verdict in which Su Xingqi was sentenced to life imprisonment for 3 counts of murder and 1 count of manslaughter. The judge declared that Su Xingqi had no conscience, was worse than an animal, and had no remorse. He accused Su of fabricating his self-defense testimony and his relationship with Helen Tong Yen, not to receive a lighter sentence, but simply to tarnish their reputations after death. Su Xingqi's family from Hong Kong defended him against Xing Fai's accusations, claiming that Xing Fai was a hypocrite and the real villain, using Su as cheap labor and taking a portion of his wages. This defense angered neighbors and residents of Ping Chi Village, forcing Su's family to return to China to escape the negative backlash. The crime itself was one of the most shocking in Hong Kong's history. Tam Xing Fai's family received a significant outpouring of support, with many people visiting to offer their condolences and netizens donating enough money to pay for the funeral. In addition, the family's 9 stray dogs were adopted by another family and taken for a walk every July 5 near their old home. On August 9, 2022, Su Xingqi died of liver cancer at the age of 55 in Stanley Prison, Hong Kong. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Karen Oviedo. Rolando Angel Aquino was born in 1987 in Bolivia. As the eldest of 7 siblings, he learned the importance of family bonds and hard work from an early age. He dreamed of having a happy family filled with the joy and laughter of children. In his youth, he met Carolina Chavez and she bore him a son. Even though they divorced, they still maintain a good relationship. Then Soledad Gardio entered his life and they had another son named Elias. Although the relationship with Soledad did not last long, Rolando remained a devoted and caring father to his children. He still kept in touch and maintained warm relationships with Carolina and Soledad. From an early age, Rolando was very active and passionate about sports, including football, and he played for a local team. Friends and family described him as kind and very hardworking. He got along well with his neighbors and was known for being exceptionally sociable. During a local soccer match, Rolando was attracted to Karen. Rolando and Karen soon developed a romance. A chance meeting led to true happiness. In 2016, Rolando and Karen lived together and opened a business at home. Karen was born on March 30, 1990, and grew up in Manado. Famous for being extroverted and open-minded, Karen always wanted to have a happy family. Before meeting Rolando, she married Rul, and then she and Rul had 2 beautiful daughters. However, over time, their marriage began to deteriorate. Financial difficulties were the main cause of their arguments, and they soon divorced. Rolando and Karen's lives passed peacefully, but a tragedy occurred. In the summer of 2019, Rolando's son, 9-year-old Elias, came to Rolando's house to visit him in the afternoon. That evening was filled with laughter from Elias, Rolando, and even Karen. However, the next morning, July 12, 2019, Rolando noticed that Elias was not feeling well. Rolando quickly contacted the family of his ex-wife, Soledad, and quickly took his son to the children's hospital. When Elias was transported to the hospital, pediatricians realized that Elias's condition was critical, requiring immediate transfer to the intensive care unit. Despite the efforts of medical staff, Elias died shortly after arriving at the hospital. What was puzzling was that Elias arrived at his father's house in completely normal health. Medical reports revealed that Elias died of third-degree poisoning, leading to multiple organ failure and cerebral thrombosis. This left Rolando and his ex-wife, Soledad, completely devastated. Doctors recommended additional forensic examinations. However, Soledad and Elias's grandmother refused the procedure. Karen then offered to cremate the boy's body, but Soledad instead chose to bury him in a private cemetery. Elias's death left Rolando completely anguished. He was greatly saddened by the sudden passing of his youngest son. Karen, caring and loving, was always by Rolando's side. She arranged everything, supported her boyfriend, and helped him overcome his pain and grief. Over time, with Karen's warmth and care, Rolando's pain began to ease. 16 months later, Rolando proposed to Karen. They got married, and Rolando believed that she would always be with him. However, their happiness was short-lived. Karen's life took a different turn on February 6, 2022, when she returned home from a gym session to find her husband Rolando extremely unwell. The next day, a medical ambulance was seen outside their home. 35-year-old Rolando had collapsed in the living room after vomiting violently. Emergency medical services quickly arrived, and Rolando was taken to Santa Maria Clinic. The medical team's efforts to save Rolando were ultimately unsuccessful. Rolando died on February 9 from severe poisoning. When medical staff began questioning Karen, they learned that Rolando had been taking medication for skin discoloration. However, this information only increased their suspicions. Closer examination of Rolando's body revealed an overdose of calcium oxalate crystals, which were often a sign of ethylene glycol poisoning, commonly used in automotive antifreeze. This mysterious and unexpected death led to an investigation into Rolando's death, and the authorities were determined to get to the bottom of it. The prosecutor's office questioned Rolando and Karen's neighbors, who revealed that Karen had repeatedly given her husband an unknown drug. Although Karen initially claimed it was a cure for Rolando's skin blemishes, neighbors remained suspicious, which led investigators to look into Karen. During the investigation, Karen was thoroughly questioned about the events surrounding her husband's death. Many conflicts arose during her interrogation. When asked about the substance she gave her husband before he died, Karen confirmed that it was a medicine to treat dark spots on her skin that she used through an intravenous infusion. However, she could not provide the potion because the housekeeper had thrown it away. Further investigation led to an interview with the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, who contradicted Karen's statement about the disposal of the jar. Claudia also said she overheard a conversation between the couple in which Rolando expressed dissatisfaction with the medication he was taking. As a result, Karen was detained by the police and her cell phone was confiscated for further investigation. Rolando's sudden death shocked his family, friends, and teammates. Rolando's ex-wife, Karen's ex-husband, was especially stunned by rumors that Rolando's death might have been an act of intentional poisoning. Further investigation revealed disturbing evidence. A search of Karen's phone revealed she had researched the most dangerous toxins online and had found a way to delete her search history. Additionally, records showed she had ordered ethylene glycol, a toxic substance used in the manufacture of antifreeze, from an online store on 2 separate occasions. This substance is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is extremely dangerous to humans. Based on preliminary forensic results and collected evidence, the prosecutor's office charged Karen with intentionally poisoning Rolando. It is believed that she mixed the toxic substance with the orange juice that Rolando drank, causing his health to seriously decline and ultimately leading to his death. By mid-February, evidence against Karen had been collected, and Karen had been charged with capital murder. At the same time, investigators had begun looking into suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of 9-year-old Elias. A thorough investigation into Elias' medical history had been initiated by the prosecutor's office. According to the boy's mother, Elias had been in good health until he suddenly fell into a coma at his father's house and never recovered. Elias's death certificate had stated that his body had suffered from cerebral thrombosis. However, investigators had found this explanation suspicious, especially since Elias had been young and he had been in good health. As part of the investigation, the prosecutor's office had requested information about any purchases of ethylene glycol. Karen had been found to have purchased the poison on July 2, 2019, just before Elias had arrived at Aquino's residence. Relatives of Elias had also provided valuable information, revealing that Karen had urged the boy's body to be cremated, but his biological mother had instead chosen a traditional burial. These findings had been enough for prosecutor Claudia Rios to file more serious murder charges against Karen, accusing her of poisoning Elias. A judge had then ordered Karen detained pending trial on March 14. After she had tried to appeal the decision, the judge had overruled her, concluding that Karen would have to remain in detention until the trial began. Karen's highly publicized trial had begun on November 28, 2022, at Mendoza Criminal Court, attracting widespread public and media attention. 2 separate indictments had been pending against Karen, one for the murder of Elias, headed by prosecutor Fernando Gudo, and another for the murder of Rolando, headed by Claudia Rios. During the trial, Javier Aquino, Rolando's 15-year-old son, had appeared as the plaintiff, along with his lawyer. Prosecutor Fernando had presented the case, accusing Karen of poisoning Elias and Rolando by mixing ethylene glycol with orange juice, leading to severe poisoning and death. Karen's defense team had disputed the charges, claiming Rolando had a history of violence and abuse of their client. They had asserted that there had been no reliable evidence to support the allegations and that Karen had had no motive for murder. The defense had questioned why Karen would have killed Elias, who had posed no threat to her. They had also pointed out that Karen had been the sole owner of the house, car, and business and that she had not made any suspicious purchases using her phone. Furthermore, the defense had argued that if Karen had used ethylene glycol to poison Elias, as the prosecutor had claimed, then her search for information about the poison on the internet would have made no sense. The defense had emphasized that although the deaths of Rolando and Elias had been heinous crimes, it had been necessary to clearly prove Karen's guilt before prosecuting her. Karen's defense team had tried to claim the allegations against her had been false. Karen had said that Rolando had bought the antifreeze by hacking into her account instead of buying it herself. Additionally, Karen had claimed to have had an alibi for the day her husband had been poisoned on February 6, saying she had not been home when he had first shown symptoms. As the trial had continued, the prosecution had asked Karen a number of questions. An important point addressed by Prosecutor Fernando had been whether Karen had offered to cremate her deceased son, Rolando. Karen had firmly replied that she had had no say in the matter and had never suggested cremation. The prosecution presented relatives of Rolando as witnesses to provide more insight into the events surrounding the death. Elias's mother, Soledad, testified that after her son's death, Rolando told her that Karen had suggested cremating Elias's body so both families could keep his ashes. However, Soledad refused this idea. She also shared her memories of meeting Rolando at the cemetery, where he mentioned Karen's jealousy. According to Soledad, Karen's jealousy was so intense that she and Rolando slept in separate beds. Another witness, Carolina, the mother of Rolando's first child, confirmed that Rolando and Karen slept separately, as her ex-husband had told her. Although Carolina had not interacted with Karen before the incident, Karen called her on the morning of February 8 to inform her that Rolando was in the hospital due to illness. Karen claimed that Rolando had probably taken some medication and was feeling unwell. She also asked Carolina to help her unlock Rolando's cell phone, suspecting that he was having an affair. Carolina was shocked to hear about Rolando's condition, as they had met just a few days prior and he seemed fine. After speaking with Karen, Carolina learned that Rolando had taken medication for skin blemishes, which caused an allergic reaction. The trial continued with doctors and experts presenting crucial forensic evidence and the results of a psychological examination to the jury. This new information shed light on previously overlooked details. Dr. Ivana Marinelli, a pediatrician who treated Elias in July 2019, explained how the boy was rushed to the hospital with severe breathing difficulties and required immediate intubation. A CT scan revealed a deep cerebral thrombosis, and Elias received intensive care. Dr. Ivana confirmed that Elias's symptoms were consistent with ethylene glycol poisoning, including impaired consciousness, restlessness, and a coma accompanied by a blood clotting disorder. The jury also reviewed the results of Karen's psychological examination, which was conducted at the prosecution's request. The experts found that Karen had lied and concealed the truth. The examination revealed that Karen showed no emotional response to her husband's death, raising doubts about her sincerity. The prosecutor questioned whether Karen had truly been a victim of domestic violence as she had claimed in her statement. This information provided insight into Karen's psychological profile. After weeks of waiting and many court hearings, the trial was finally over. The jury delivered a unanimous verdict after a lengthy period of silence and anticipation. Karen was found guilty of murdering Elias with exceptional cruelty and of causing Rolando's death through a particularly heinous process. As a result, she was sentenced to life in prison. Karen had attempted to evade punishment for the brutal murders that shocked the community and left many unanswered questions. Her plan to cremate the victims' bodies was likely a last-ditch effort to avoid accountability. However, the court and jury remained resolute, ultimately rendering a fair and just verdict. Karen's decision to harm her loved ones remains a puzzle. Despite having everything for a happy life, her motivations may be rooted in emotions like jealousy. This tragic case reminds us that even close relationships can conceal dark secrets, and genuine love and loyalty should always be the top priority. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Ellen Greenberg. Ellen Greenberg was born in June 1993 in New York to Santa and George Greenberg. She is an only child and grew up in a loving environment. During her high school years, she was very active in sports. Ellen was very sociable and also did well in her studies. After finishing high school, she attended Pennsylvania State University. However, when she started working in her field, Ellen realized that it was not her true passion. While working, Ellen also enrolled in a correspondence course at a teacher training academy. A few years later, she successfully completed her degree and moved to Philadelphia, where she became a junior high school teacher at a local school. Ellen's life was going well. She truly enjoyed working with her students. During this time, Ellen began a relationship with a young man named Samuel, also known as Sam Goldberg. He came from a wealthy and prominent family. Samuel's parents owned a large business and his uncle was known as one of the best lawyers in the state. Ellen and Samuel met at a party in 2009 through friends and quickly developed feelings for each other. Their relationship quickly developed and they later decided to live together. In 2011, Samuel proposed to Ellen with a diamond ring. The happy couple began planning their wedding, scheduled for the spring of that year. In January 2011, Ellen went to work at school as usual, but around noon, a strong wind and snowstorm caused classes to be canceled and both students and teachers were sent home. Ellen returned to her apartment, and then suddenly, Samuel also returned home. At 5 p.m., Samuel decided to go to the gym in their apartment complex. Samuel was gone for less than an hour, but when he returned, he found the apartment door locked from the inside and could not be entered. Samuel knocked loudly on the door and called Ellen's name. He then tried calling and texting Ellen, but there was no response. Samuel went down to the first floor to ask the security guard for help. Samuel explained the situation and asked the guard to open the door first. But the guard said that it was against his rules because he could not leave his post. Samuel then returned to his floor. He banged his shoulder on the door and on his first try, he broke the latch. It was very quiet inside. When he entered the kitchen, he saw a horrifying scene of Ellen lying on the floor, leaning against the cupboard door, her body stabbed multiple times and her clothes soaked in blood. Samuel quickly called an ambulance. When asked to check Ellen's pulse, Samuel hesitated and kept wondering if he really needed to do so. After a moment of silence, Samuel suddenly said that there was a knife protruding from Ellen's chest. Police arriving at the scene were surprised to find the door locked from the inside with a bolt, which Samuel had pushed open with his shoulder. There was no sign of forced entry or any intruder in the room. Nothing had been stolen from the apartment. During Ellen's autopsy, there were no signs of struggle or any attempt to defend herself, suggesting that the incident occurred suddenly and the victim had no time to react. Ellen's autopsy found about 20 stab wounds of varying depth, the fatal stab wound to her heart. Ellen struggled with anxiety and panic attacks. The situation became so severe that she sought the help of a psychologist. The initial assumption of the police, before the autopsy, was that Ellen had committed suicide. Ellen's therapist prescribed 2 anti-anxiety medications, which she took regularly. The psychologist confirmed that the medications would not affect Ellen's mental state or lead to thoughts of death. Despite her anxiety, Ellen never voiced such thoughts. Additionally, Ellen's friends and colleagues noticed that after she and Samuel began living together, her behavior began to change. Along with becoming anxious and restless, Ellen's parents also noticed similar strange behavior. 3 weeks before the tragedy, Ellen told her mother that she wanted to quit school, give up everything, and move back in with her parents. Her mother was surprised by this and assured Ellen that she could come home at any time. After the couple moved in together, Samuel began to act violently toward Ellen, leaving her fearful and reluctant to speak up. Ellen's psychologist noted that Ellen had difficulty expressing her feelings and experiences. It seemed as though she wanted to reveal something important, but fear held her back. The lack of care in the examination of the crime scene and body, as well as the subsequent investigation, was astonishing. Many important details, events, and evidence were overlooked or lost, making it impossible to reconstruct the full details of the incident. Initially, there were no defensive wounds on Ellen's hands. Many bruises were found on her body, and the degree of healing suggested that they had occurred several weeks ago. Samuel claimed that these injuries could have been caused by playing sports. However, Ellen's parents said that their daughter had not been to the gym or the playground for quite some time. Soon after the investigation began, the possibility of suicide was raised. Ellen had approximately 20 penetrating wounds of varying depths, and forensic analysis showed that 10 of these wounds were from the back. If Ellen had been attacked from behind and suffered serious injuries, even if they did not kill Ellen immediately, they would have likely limited her ability to move and resist. It is highly unlikely that someone would inflict such wounds on themselves and then stab themselves deep into the heart, leading medical experts to question the cause of death. The investigation still did not result in criminal charges. As there was no trace of a stranger in the apartment, nor any sign of self-defense. Although the victim's wife or partner is often the prime suspect in these cases, Samuel was never a suspect. No charges were ever brought against Samuel, and he was only questioned at the police station on the day of the incident, along with his uncle, a prominent lawyer. The events of that day were reconstructed entirely from Samuel's account, which was sometimes unclear. But he attributed his confusion to stress. Neighbors reported only that they heard knocking and screaming from Samuel when he could not get into the apartment and was trying to call Ellen. Samuel claimed that he asked a security guard for help, that the security guard accompanied him down the stairs, and that the security guard witnessed Samuel kicking down a door. However, the security guard denied this claim, claiming that he never left his post. Regardless, the police did not look into the matter further, considering it irrelevant. Only a surveillance camera leading to the gym was examined, which showed Samuel walking toward the gym and then returning. Samuel may have escaped by another route and then returned to the gym the same way. However, his alibi was not investigated, and witnesses who confirmed that Samuel was working out were not sought. The police officer who responded to the call noticed that Samuel was acting unusually, even though he was screaming and crying loudly. The expert suspected that he was faking his panic and anxiety. Importantly, before calling the police, Samuel contacted his parents and his uncle, a lawyer. His uncle arrived at the apartment before the police arrived to give a statement. Samuel went to the police station with his uncle. Furthermore, the next day, Samuel returned to the sealed apartment with his uncle to retrieve some personal belongings. Samuel took 2 laptops, a phone, and a tablet from Ellen. A few days later, the police decided to examine the devices and discovered that their search history included topics related to suicide. When the police arrived at the scene, they conducted only a preliminary examination and concluded that Ellen had committed suicide. Despite new information that later emerged, the police refused to change their verdict. The sequence of the injuries remains unclear, but it has been confirmed that the final wound was to the heart. The medical examiner found this odd and decided to investigate further. They sent a sample of Ellen's spine to a specialist who could assess the condition of the spinal cord. If the spinal cord was damaged, it would indicate that Ellen was paralyzed and could not have stabbed herself in the heart. Soon after, the police suddenly changed their minds and stopped the investigation, stating that, according to the report, there was no spinal cord injury. However, this conclusion was not added to the case file. It was also not noted that although there were many serious injuries on Ellen's body, there was very little blood, suggesting that someone might have wiped it away. No one actively looked for any signs of blood that had been wiped away. Additionally, the apartment's trash bins had not been checked, meaning any potential evidence inside was lost forever. Samuel's family, who were the first to arrive on the scene, notified Ellen's parents of their daughter's death. Ellen's family, who lived several hundred miles away, quickly arrived on the scene. Ellen's parents received no clear explanation of what happened that night involving Ellen. They were given only vague conclusions and were told that no criminal investigation would be initiated. Ellen's parents then chose to conduct an investigation, bringing in independent experts. Shortly thereafter, a private investigator contacted them and offered to assist them for free, as he wanted to shed light on this puzzling case. The detective examined the evidence and concluded that Ellen's body had been moved after her death. He also discovered smears on the floor that looked like drag marks. Additionally, when reviewing the case, the security guard recalled that Samuel, who had asked for help, was wearing a tracksuit and said he had just come from the gym, when in fact he was wearing boots. Despite this new evidence and witness testimony, Ellen's parents were once again denied a criminal case and no further investigation was conducted. Ellen's parents were not allowed access to important case files. 4 years later, a young police officer joined the unit as an assistant prosecutor. After learning about this unusual unsolved case while in college, he decided to look into the archives to uncover the truth. His attention was drawn to the wound at the back of the head, which might have been the first sign that Ellen had been attacked from behind when she was not expecting it. He was concerned to note that there was no spinal cord injury, but there was no official document to prove it. He assumed it was lost somewhere in the archives. He later formally requested a copy of the document from the forensic center, and it turned out that no one had ever come to such a conclusion and the body had not been examined for spinal cord injury. A fragment of the spine was surprisingly preserved and could be re-examined. An independent specialist assessed it and found that the spinal cord had sustained damage in multiple areas, indicating that Ellen could not have caused any additional injuries to herself. The findings were submitted to the police, but after reviewing them again, they decided not to pursue criminal charges. In 2018, the medical examiner concluded that Ellen had inflicted all 20 of her injuries on herself. The investigation reached a dead end. In their grief, the parents hired a new lawyer and together they gathered all the previously undocumented documents, evidence, facts, and witness statements. In 2019, they filed a new lawsuit against the medical examiner and the police. The following spring, the case was accepted and settled, but the trial never took place due to the global pandemic. Due to negligence by the police and medical examiners, important evidence was lost forever. Ellen's parents created a social media page to track the progress of the investigation, sharing official documents, new information, and updates. Ellen's family, friends, and colleagues are convinced that she could not have killed herself, especially not in such a brutal way. In the summer of 2022, the case was dismissed again, and Ellen's parents successfully appealed to the district attorney's office, where a new prosecutor took over. The investigation was restarted 11 years after the tragic events, but to this day it remains unsolved. During the first year after the tragedy, Samuel tried to keep in touch with Ellen's family. However, he did not participate in their investigation and refused to communicate with the police. He seemed to have no interest in the case, as Samuel accepted Ellen's death as a suicide. Samuel got married a year later. He and his wife moved to another state and cut ties with Ellen's family. They are now raising 2 children together. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Wilma Anderson. Wilma Anderson is the daughter of Linda and Marcus Anderson, her parents' divorce later left difficulties in the family, making Wilma's living situation unstable. Although she could not live with both parents, her mother was always interested in her life. Wilma lived with her older sister Emily. Wilma is an active and ambitious girl. She likes to share her life on social networks, often posting photos on Facebook. Wilma loves being in front of the camera, showing her creativity and cheerful personality. Wilma met Tishko Ahmed Shabazz in Sweden when she was 15 years old. At that time, Tishko was 20 years old. Because the age of sexual consent in Sweden is 15, their relationship did not cause any legal problems. Although initially apprehensive about the 5-year age gap, Wilma's mother trusted her daughter's decision and eventually accepted Tishko. Tishko was originally from Iraq but moved to Sweden with his family when he was 8 years old. Tishko lived with his father and stepmother. During his school years, Tishko faced bullying, but as he grew older, he developed a strong determination to overcome any challenges he faced. In 2014, Tishko became a Swedish citizen, and after completing his studies in 2018, Tishko found a job in the care industry. Wilma and Tishko moved in together in Uddevalla, Sweden. Over time, Tishko became increasingly controlling, and Wilma's mother noticed a change in her daughter's behavior during the 2 years Wilma lived with Tishko. Wilma often confided in her sister Emily about her difficult relationship with Tishko. On November 14, 2019, Wilma told Emily over the phone that she was ending her relationship with Tishko. She was exhausted by Tishko's control over every aspect of her life, including what she wore, where she went, who she talked to, and how she applied her makeup. Feeling suffocated and desperate to end the relationship, she said she had to pack up and leave before Tishko got home from work. Emily tried to contact Wilma, but her calls went unanswered. The next day, November 15th, Wilma missed her dentist appointment. 2 days later, November 17th, Wilma's parents came to the apartment she shared with Tishko. After several knocks, Tishko opened the door, apparently intoxicated. Wilma's mother, Linda, asked Tishko about Wilma's whereabouts. He admitted that their relationship was over and that Wilma had left after taking her things. Tishko claimed that he did not know where Wilma was. Wilma's parents entered the apartment, hoping to find out more. Tishko recounted the argument that led to the breakup, with him and Wilma having a heated argument when he returned home from work around 5:30 p.m. Initially, her parents were not too concerned, as Tishko and Wilma's relationship was unstable. Emily, extremely concerned about Wilma's disappearance, created a Facebook post seeking information about Wilma. Normally, Wilma always contacted her family, so the lack of contact was very unusual. In the post, Emily described Wilma's appearance as 165 centimeters tall with black hair. After the posts were posted on social media, the police got involved. They interviewed Emily and other family members and began searching for anyone who may have come into contact with Wilma. However, neither Linda nor Emily had heard from her since her disappearance. With an extensive search effort underway, a combined task force of police, friends, and family set out to track Wilma using dogs and drone technology. When police approached Tishko for questioning, he claimed to have no knowledge of Wilma's disappearance or whereabouts, confirming that he had had no recent contact with her. By November 17th, 3 days into the search for Wilma, there were still no leads. Wilma was normally active on social media, but she had been strangely quiet during the time she was missing. As a result, some 5,000 people joined the search effort, and police returned to Tishko to gather more information. However, Tishko insisted that he knew nothing about Wilma's disappearance. Tishko claimed that Wilma had moved on to another man after they broke up, but there was no evidence to support this claim. Wilma's friends and family were left deeply concerned about her disappearance. Meanwhile, Wilma's family shared disturbing details with police about how Wilma's life had changed for the worse since living with Tishko. According to Wilma's family, Tishko controlled Wilma's life. Her sister, Emily, revealed that Wilma confessed that she was abused while living with Tishko. But despite this abuse, Wilma still had strong feelings for Tishko. Tishko took extreme measures to monitor Wilma's activities, including installing a GPS device on her phone. This allowed him to constantly track her location. A series of text messages between the two revealed Tishko's controlling behavior. The police thoroughly investigated Tishko's alibi. He claimed that after arriving home from work at 5 p.m., he did not leave his apartment. To verify Tishko's story, police tracked the GPS on Tishko's phone. Police found CCTV footage showing Tishko at a supermarket around 2:30 p.m. on the day Wilma went missing. He then returned home from work at 5 p.m. Neighbors reported a loud argument between Tishko and Wilma, and arguments were common between them. A loud argument between the Wilma and Tishko occurred around 6 p.m. This prompted a concerned neighbor to check on them. As the neighbor approached the apartment door, they noticed an eerie silence. The sudden quiet was unsettling, but the neighbor, unsure of what to do next, returned to their own apartment. The police thoroughly investigated Tishko's activities, including his workplace and company vehicle. They requested forensic testing on the vehicle and reviewed the GPS data, which revealed his movements from Thursday the 14th to Monday the 18th. According to the GPS log, Tishko had visited clients and returned to his residence during his regular work hours on those days. On the evening of the argument, around 6:30 p.m., Tishko left his apartment. Witnesses saw him walking alone along the freeway, wearing all black clothing. A motorcyclist described Tishko as appearing lost in thought. Police stopped Tishko and escorted him home. When questioned, Tishko said he initially intended to catch a train but decided to walk home instead. However, the police did not file an official report on the incident. Later, on November 19, 2019, Tishko was arrested. He had obvious scratches on his wrists. A search of Tishko's apartment revealed clues such as Wilma's belongings, including a handbag, jacket, shoes, and eyeglasses. Wilma's mother, Linda, insisted that her daughter would always carry her bag, adding to the mystery. Forensic experts tested the scene with Blue Star, a sophisticated version of luminol, and found a trail of blood. Every room had blood on the walls and floors, suggesting a violent struggle had taken place throughout the apartment. The bed had a gruesome stain, a torso-shaped mark that was visible under the glow of Blue Star. The discovery of muscle tissue on a knife and on the living room wall added to the horrific scene. The large amount of blood found made it seem unlikely that anyone could have survived. The search continued outside the apartment, where trash bags were found containing Tishko's bedding with incriminating blood stains. Confronted at the police station, Tishko was shown the evidence against him. However, he strongly denied any involvement, claiming he would have known if someone had been seriously hurt in his home. At the same time, more and more people were joining the search for Wilma every day. The apartment where Wilma was last seen has now been turned into a crime scene, but all attempts to contact Wilma have been unsuccessful. 2 weeks after Wilma went missing, on November 28, police brought in sniffer dogs to assist in the search. These trained dogs are experts at detecting the scent of dead bodies. When they entered the bedroom, one of the dogs quickly indicated that it had found something, a sign that there was likely a dead person or human remains in the area. A strong, unpleasant stench filled the apartment, making the already gloomy atmosphere even more oppressive. The police had searched the place before, but this time they carefully searched the bedroom, paying special attention to the area the dogs had marked. They focused on a wardrobe, which at first glance looked like another piece of furniture. However, inside this ordinary-looking wardrobe was a small travel suitcase. When they opened the suitcase, the police found a large object wrapped in aluminum kitchen foil. When they carefully removed the foil, they witnessed a horrifying sight with blood stains on the foil. Wilma's head had been severed, wrapped, and secured with tape. The travel case, which held the gruesome evidence of Wilma's fate, was sent to the forensic labs in Gothenburg for further analysis. A detailed examination uncovered Tishko's fingerprints. The investigation revealed the shocking conclusion of the case. Although the exact cause of Wilma's death could not be confirmed, investigators found severe injuries to her head and eyes consistent with blunt force trauma. The violent nature of the decapitation made it difficult to assess the full extent of Wilma's head injuries. Wilma's family was devastated by the news of Wilma's tragic fate. Wilma's mother Linda joined the efforts to find the rest of Wilma's body. The family was forced to confront the horrific details of the crime, which were slowly emerging from the evidence found in Tishko's apartment. A harrowing picture began to emerge. Wilma's final moments may have taken place in the living room, where she was brutally attacked, suffering a fatal blow to the head. Swedish police recorded Tishko's denial of involvement in Wilma's murder, in which he maintained his innocence. His statement revealed a distorted perception of love, as he said, "You forget that this is a girl he loved and that he lived his whole life for. If he killed her, he wouldn't be able to keep her head." Despite this, law enforcement gathered enough evidence to charge Tishko, and his trial was scheduled for May 2020. Throughout the trial, Wilma's body remained missing. Tishko showed no signs of remorse or emotion. In court, his defense team tried to argue that he was not guilty by reason of insanity, pointing to his irrational beliefs and claims about Wilma as evidence. However, this defense was unsuccessful. On July 27, 2020, the court delivered its verdict. Tishko, 23, was found guilty of murdering 17-year-old Wilma Anderson and was initially sentenced to life in prison. However, the appeals court later reduced his sentence to 18 years. The sentence was reduced in part due to a lack of concrete evidence surrounding the circumstances of Wilma's death, including the fact that her body was never found. Wilma's funeral was finally held in late 2020, bringing closure to the tragic events, but undoubtedly causing immense grief for her family. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Neil Entwistle. Neil Entwistle was born on September 18, 1978, in Worksop, Nottinghamshire, England, to Clifford and Yvonne Entwistle. He grew up in a humble home with his younger brother, Russell. His father worked as a coal miner before becoming a labor councillor, while his mother worked as a cook in a school cafeteria. After finishing high school, Neil Entwistle enrolled in the University of York, where he studied electronic engineering and business management. During this time, Entwistle met an American student named Rachel Souza who was attending York as a study abroad student. Rachel was originally from the Kingston area in Massachusetts, had attended Silver Lake Region High School before going to Holy Cross College in Worcester. While studying abroad in York for a year, she met Neil Entwistle on the rowing team. Neil Entwistle was withdrawn, shy, and indecisive, rarely interacting with others. Rachel, on the other hand, exuded confidence, was cheerful, outgoing, and well-liked. Her American roots brought an undeniable charm to her personality, and Rachel was well received by the other members of the rowing team. Over time, Neil Entwistle and Rachel found themselves drawn to each other, eventually spending more and more time together. Benjamin Pryor, a close friend of Neil Entwistle and Rachel's since college, said the couple were very understanding, affectionate and caring towards each other. While Neil Entwistle worked at a defense and security technology company based in Malvern, Worcestershire, Rachel pursued a career in education after completing her studies in 2002. Rachel took up a teaching role in English, drama and theater studies at St. Augustine's Catholic High School in Redditch, nurturing young minds through the arts. In a post on Friends Reunited in June 2003, Neil Entwistle happily shared about his upcoming marriage to Rachel. They met through rowing, although he expressed dissatisfaction with life south of the border in Birmingham. He was happy with his upcoming marriage. In August 2003, Neil Entwistle and Rachel got married in 2 ceremonies, one in Plymouth, UK, and the other in Massachusetts, USA. After the US ceremony, they had a reception in the UK in November of the same year. Neil Entwistle shared the early days of their married life on a family website, including their Christmas 2004 trip to the Mediterranean. In April 2005, their daughter, Lillian Rose, was born. Neil Entwistle and Rachel decided to move to the United States. They initially lived with Rachel's mother and stepfather in Carver, Massachusetts, until they purchased their own home in Hopkinton on January 12, 2006. Their new home was located on a quiet cul-de-sac with only 8 neighbors, creating a peaceful setting close to a major city. Despite Neil Entwistle's efforts to find work as a computer programmer and IT specialist, he encountered difficulties in finding work, leading to financial stress and mounting debt. To ease the financial burden, Neil Entwistle turned to selling PC parts on eBay. However, his business was affected by customer complaints about undelivered orders, forcing eBay to investigate fraud. An investigation into Neil Entwistle's eBay activities uncovered that he was using multiple accounts under different names. Further investigation revealed that Neil Entwistle was involved in running a website called millimaker.co.uk. This website promoted a get-rich-quick scheme that promised to help people in the adult entertainment industry make a guaranteed $6,000 per month within 6 months. The website also claimed to offer 24/7 assistance. However, these claims ultimately led to the website being shut down. Neil Entwistle used online platforms to find sexual partners. He visited several websites to pursue relationships looking for sexual partners. On Adult Friend Finder, Neil Entwistle created a profile and emailed several women expressing his interest in meeting sexual partners. An investigation found incriminating evidence on Neil Entwistle's laptop. In his profile, Neil Entwistle stated that he was interested in meeting American women of different ages. Neil Entwistle also mentioned that he wanted to confirm whether American women were better in bed than women from other countries. Neil Entwistle's profile indicated that he was looking for a specific type of casual relationship and was open to meeting people with similar interests. Testimony at the trial revealed Neil Entwistle had continued his interest in escort services up to January 18, 2006. Online searches he conducted on Google included Blonde Bay Escort Service, Sex Escort Services Westborough, and Escort in Worcester. In their defense, Neil Entwistle's lawyers claimed that his wife, Rachel, was dissatisfied with their sex life. However, when reviewing Neil Entwistle's internet search history, it is revealed that Neil Entwistle had much darker motives than seeking out prostitutes and seeking relationships with other women. During this time, Neil Entwistle visited his father-in-law, Joe Matarazzo, in Carver, Massachusetts. Joe Matarazzo, a member of the Old Colony Sporting Club, had previously taught Neil Entwistle how to shoot. Neil Entwistle also had a .22 caliber revolver with Joe Matarazzo's family. However, on this occasion, Neil Entwistle planned to steal a gun from Joe Matarazzo's family. Neil Entwistle went to his in-laws' home, found a hidden gun, and took it back to his house in Hopkinton. Once home, he secretly hid the firearm, waiting for the right moment to carry out a violent act against his family. On January 20, 2006, Neil Entwistle entered the master bedroom of his home, where his wife, Rachel, and their 9-month-old daughter, Lillian, were sleeping in their new bed. Neil Entwistle shot Rachel in the head and then shot Lillian, who was lying next to her. The bullet passed through Lillian's body and also hit Rachel in the left chest. Later that day, Neil Entwistle returned to Carver with the uncleaned weapon. He would later claim that he had gone shopping at Staples on that Friday and discovered his family dead when he got home. After leaving Carver, Neil Entwistle drove to Boston's Logan Airport on the evening of January 20, 2006. At the airport, he made 2 successful ATM withdrawals totaling $800, but 3 additional attempts to withdraw $420 were declined. The next day, January 21, 2006, Neil Entwistle bought a one-way ticket to London without checking any luggage. He boarded a British Airways flight that departed Boston at 8:15 p.m. that evening. Unbeknownst to Neil Entwistle, several neighbors he had invited for dinner, including Joanna Gatley and her sister Maureen, arrived at his home around 7 p.m. to find it locked with the lights on inside. Concerned for Rachel's safety, neighbors attempted to contact her mother, but were unable to reach her. They then called 911 at around 8:30. Police arrived at Neil Entwistle's home to search for clues about the missing family. Upon entering, Sergeant Michael Sutton observed the bedroom, noticing a large unmade bed, but nothing unusual. After completing their search, the police locked the house and left. However, Joanna Gatley and Maureen were still worried and decided to spend the night in the car outside the house, hoping that Rachel's family would return. To cope with the cold weather, they made several trips to the gas station restroom. The following Sunday morning, Joanna Gatley and Maureen gained entry to the house using the garage door code they had obtained from a next-door neighbor the night before. Inside, Joanna Gatley and Maureen discovered dishes and leftover food in the kitchen, indicating that the family had just finished eating. The bathtub was still full of water, indicating that the couple had bathed their infant daughter. They proceeded to the master bedroom, then to Lillian's bathroom, where classical music was playing, and finally checked the living room. Rachel's mother and stepfather then arrived at Rachel's house, and together they searched around the house. After assessing the situation, they decided to report the family missing to the Hopkinton Police Department. The police arrived at Rachel's house. Sergeant Sutton entered the basement and detected a foul odor. He followed the stench into the house to the master bedroom, where he found the bodies of Rachel and her infant child, Lillian. The mother's body was lying on a bed, covered in clothes. Rachel had her arms spread across Lillian's chest, both of them wearing pajamas. Autopsy results showed that Rachel died from a gunshot wound to the head, while Lillian was shot in the torso. DNA evidence was also found on the barrel of the gun and on the butt of the gun, belonging to Neil Entwistle. About 36 hours after returning to England, Neil Entwistle visited his parents, Cliff and Yvonne. He told them that he had been driving around and had spent the previous night in a hotel. During this visit, Neil Entwistle revealed to his parents that he had discovered the bodies of his wife and daughter. On January 23, 2006, Neil Entwistle had a 2-hour telephone conversation with Hopkinton Police, which was recorded. On January 26, 2006, U.S. law enforcement officials traveled to the UK to interview Neil Entwistle. The next day, after consulting with a lawyer at the U.S. Embassy in London, Neil Entwistle chose not to cooperate with the American detectives. Meanwhile, Rachel and her daughter Lillian were buried in Evergreen Cemetery in Kingston, Massachusetts, under the surname Souza, sharing a single grave. With around 500 people attending the funeral to pay their respects. However, Neil Entwistle was absent from the ceremony, and Neil Entwistle's name was not mentioned in the proceedings or inscribed on the headstone. Despite this, Neil Entwistle sent a bouquet of flowers, consisting of an orange rose and a white lily, with a note that read, "My orange roses and lilies forever," signed Sakoko. After returning to the UK, Neil Entwistle resumed his normal life in February 2006. However, the media continued to gather outside his parents' home in Worksop. Neil Entwistle went to Notting Hill for dinner with his old crew from York University, followed by a trip to the cinema. Just a week after the funeral, on February 8, 2006, the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office issued an arrest warrant for Neil Entwistle. The following day, February 9, 2006, Neil Entwistle was arrested by police at Royal Oak Station as he was about to board a train. Neil Entwistle was returned to the United States on February 15 and appeared in court, where he was denied bail and held at the Middlesex County Jail in Cambridge, Massachusetts. On March 28, 2006, Neil Entwistle was formally charged with murder and illegal possession of a firearm and ammunition. Neil Entwistle pleaded not guilty despite the charges against him. Almost a year after the incident, in December 2006, authorities at Middlesex County Jail found letters Neil Entwistle had written to his parents and lawyers. These letters showed that Neil Entwistle was depressed and might be thinking about killing himself. As a result, he was moved to Bridgewater Hospital for a psychiatric evaluation before being sent back to Middlesex County. Forensic psychiatrist Christopher Cordes believed that Neil Entwistle's behavior was caused by Asperger's syndrome, a view that was shared by Dr. David Holmes. After several delays, the process of choosing jurors for Neil Entwistle's trial at Middlesex Superior Court began in June 2008. The trial for the double murder of Neil Entwistle's wife and daughter began on June 2, 2008, in Massachusetts. Elliot Weinstein led the defense team for Neil Entwistle. During the trial, Elliot attempted to object to the prosecution's plan to introduce DNA evidence, but was unsuccessful. Elliot also attempted to suppress other evidence found in the family home, arguing that it was taken without a warrant, but this effort was also unsuccessful. Neil Entwistle chose not to call any witnesses or testify during the trial. Notably, Neil Entwistle showed little emotion throughout the proceedings. On June 25, 2008, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, convicting Neil Entwistle of 2 counts of first-degree murder, as well as unlawful possession of a firearm and ammunition. As a result, Neil Entwistle was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite the severe sentence, Neil Entwistle appeared calm as he left the courtroom. Neil Entwistle was incarcerated at the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center. In August 2008, he became the victim of a hoax when he shaved his head to seek protection from a white supremacist prison gang. However, instead of receiving protection, the gang threatened Neil Entwistle's life. After this incident, Neil Entwistle was placed in protective custody. He was then transferred to the Old Colony Correctional Center, a prison located in Bridgewater, Massachusetts, in December. The tragic death of Rachel and her infant daughter has left a lasting legacy of grief for the family and those who loved them. In the face of this tragic loss, the community has come together to support and comfort the grieving family. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of the Roman family. Jean-Claude Roman was born on February 11, 1954 in Laas, France, and grew up in Claques, Jura. He received his baccalaureate in 1971. He began his studies at Lycée du Parc in Lyon but dropped out after 1 semester. He then enrolled in medical school. Florence Cray was born on March 6, 1956. She pursued a medical degree at the University of Lyon, where she met Jean-Claude Roman, a distant cousin of her family. Initially, they didn't have a strong connection and barely spent time together. However, through mutual friends and study sessions, they gradually grew closer. Jean-Claude was attracted to Florence and he made an effort to win her over. In return, Florence considered him an ordinary person, not particularly outstanding. Her ideal partner was someone who combined the typical qualities of a doctor: intelligent, charming, and attractive. After failing her second exam, Florence decided to switch from medicine to pharmacy. Jean-Claude and her friend Luc Ladmiral also supported her decision. The three of them maintained the habit of studying, taking exams, and supporting each other for a long time, finally graduating in 1980. Florence and Jean-Claude then married, and 6 years later they welcomed their first daughter, Caroline. 2 years later they had a son, Antoine, after Caroline was born. Florence lived a normal life as a wife and mother, working part-time locally to support her family. Her husband, Jean-Claude Raman, worked for the World Health Organization in Geneva, near their home in France. In late December 1992, Florence was out running errands in Fère, France. Her children, Caroline and Antoine, were at school, and Jean-Claude was at work in Geneva. It was a normal day, with Florence still thinking about their recent Christmas celebrations. While she was out, she met the school principal. They exchanged holiday greetings and began discussing their Christmas experiences. The conversation eventually turned to an incident involving Florence's husband. The principal mentioned that the principal had been demoted due to an affair with a teacher, which led to a school board meeting. Her husband, Jean-Claude, also served on the school board, so the principal wanted to discuss the matter with Jean-Claude, so the principal's secretary tried to find Jean-Claude's contact information in the World Health Organization directory, since Jean-Claude worked there. However, Jean-Claude's name was not found, which the principal found strange. Florence laughed it off, but she was also curious. Florence assured the principal that there must be a good reason why Jean-Claude's name and phone number were not listed, and she promised to raise the matter with Jean-Claude when he got home from work. Jean-Claude and his acquaintances have lost touch. He keeps his professional life private, sharing very little with family and friends. His wife, Florence, believes he is a respected researcher in the medical field, but she knows little about his work, and Florence does not even have his office phone number. If Florence needed to contact him urgently, she would page him, and he would call her back as soon as possible. When friends asked Florence about Jean-Claude's role at the World Health Organization, WHO, she would laugh and admit that she wasn't sure. Sometimes, she would jokingly speculate that he might be a secret spy. In 1992, Florence discovered that the WHO hosted an annual Christmas tree event, where staff members could bring their families to decorate a tree together. What surprised her was that Jean-Claude had never mentioned this event to her. Florence was deeply disturbed by the recent events surrounding her husband. First, the school president revealed that her husband was not listed in the WHO directory, despite his claims of working there. Then, she discovered that a significant family event had taken place at his workplace over a decade ago, which he had never mentioned to her. These discoveries likely weighed heavily on Florence's mind. However, during the holiday season, Florence's brother visited the family and noticed a profound sadness surrounding Florence. As the new year, 1993, began, Florence and Jean-Claude spent time together, going shopping. During their outing, Florence insisted that Jean-Claude buy himself a new suit. On January 5th, Jean-Claude withdrew a total of 2,000 francs from 2 different ATMs. He then gave 500 francs to a homeless person he met before going to a gun store. At the gun store, Jean-Claude purchased tear gas canisters, cartridges, a silencer for a .22 caliber rifle, and a stun wand. Jean-Claude returned home, however, on January 11th at 4 a.m., a frantic call was made to the fire brigade, reporting a fire at the house. Garbage collectors on their early morning rounds discovered the house on fire and immediately alerted the fire brigade. The firefighters rushed to the scene and began extinguishing the flames. While they were working, they noticed someone moving in the upstairs bedroom window, indicating that the person was seeking help. Medical personnel were called, and the person, who was Jean-Claude, was rescued from the burning house. After being rescued, Jean-Claude was found unresponsive and in shock. Paramedics immediately attended to him, and he was taken to the hospital, where he eventually fell into a coma. The fire was quickly extinguished, allowing first responders to enter the premises. A family friend, Dr. Luc Ladmiral, was called to the scene and was met with the devastating sight of the charred remains of Antoine, Caroline, and Florence being carried out on stretchers. When a household fire results in fatalities, the police typically launch an investigation to determine the cause of the fire and rule out any potential criminal activity. In this case, due to the significant loss of a prominent doctor's family, law enforcement authorities began an investigation into the tragic fire at the Roman residence. During the examination of Florence's remains, the medical team found evidence of blunt force trauma to the back of her skull, which raised suspicions and sparked an investigation. Further examination revealed that Florence did not die from the fire, but from the blunt force trauma. The examination of the children also yielded a disturbing discovery. Caroline and Antoine did not die in the fire, but were shot hours before the fire started. This new information indicates that the cause of death occurred before the house caught fire. As a result, the police have opened an investigation into the suspicious deaths of Florence and her children. However, Jean-Claude is in a coma and unable to provide any information, so the police have to look for other leads. Florence's home became a crime scene and police began interviewing relatives, acquaintances, and neighbors to find out what had happened to the family. As part of the investigation, police also contacted Luc Ladmiral, the doctor who witnessed the victims being taken from the scene. Luc had no idea what was going on, and Luc had no clue who the Florence family had enemies when asked by the police. Luc still couldn't think of anyone who might want to harm them. However, Luc was asked to come in for questioning again a few days later. During this questioning, the police asked Luc about the family's relationships and any recent events that might have led to the fire. After a thorough questioning, the police still couldn't find any reason to believe that the family had any enemies or that anything unusual had happened before the fire. The investigation then turned to Jean-Claude, and what they discovered was horrifying. Jean-Claude had never actually worked for the World Health Organization, nor had he ever lectured at the University of Dijon. In fact, he wasn't even a qualified doctor. Luc is initially skeptical, but as he thinks back to his time studying with Jean-Claude, he begins to realize that something is wrong. Luc recalls a specific incident from his second year when Jean-Claude was absent from an exam, and Luc visited Jean-Claude at home and found him unwell, with clammy skin, a pale complexion, and dark circles under his eyes. Jean-Claude confided in Luc that he was battling lymphoma, a cancer that had been under control but worsened by the stress of the exam. Luc promised to keep this a secret, especially from Florence, as Jean-Claude had asked him to. The police were unable to obtain any significant information from Luc, so they decided to wait for the results of the forensic tests on the victims. The police noticed several unusual things about the house. All the doors were locked from the inside, indicating that no one had broken in. At first, the main theory was that the fire was an accident. However, the condition of the bodies made them consider other possibilities. The findings pointed to a more complex and sinister scenario, therefore, it was necessary to interrogate Jean-Claude. Since Jean-Claude had been in a coma for several weeks, the police made him their prime suspect and conducted a full investigation during that time. After verifying with the university, it was found that Jean-Claude had spent 12 years studying, passing his first-year exams but failing those in the second year. Since there were no restrictions on re-enrollment, Jean-Claude kept signing up for the second year, attending classes and studying medical texts for over a decade. What was puzzling was that he never managed to pass the second-year exam. Jean-Claude's uncle went to his parents' house to break the tragic news. When Jean-Claude's uncle entered the house, he found the bodies of Jean-Claude's mother and father dead, both shot with the same gun used to kill Antoine and Caroline. An autopsy confirmed that the gun was the same, and the estimated time of death suggested that the murders were related. The situation becomes even more mysterious after the tragedies become public. The police receive an anonymous call from a woman. She is reluctant to get involved in the investigation but has important information to share. She reveals that she had a romantic relationship with Jean-Claude after meeting him in Paris. She was also told that he was a researcher at the World Health Organization. The woman was misled into believing that Jean-Claude was involved in and funding major research projects. He also presented himself as having a significant position in Geneva's banks, making them seem very attractive. Jean-Claude convinced her to invest in a Swiss bank by offering an unusually high 18% interest rate. The woman eventually agreed to give Jean-Claude 990,000 francs to invest, expecting to receive her returns after 3 months. As the deadline approached in early January, she reminded Jean-Claude of their agreement, stressing that she urgently needed the funds to support herself and her family. After negotiating, Jean-Claude invited the woman to dinner with a well-known politician, which sparked her interest in recovering her investment. On the agreed day, Jean-Claude picked her up in Paris, and they began their journey. However, as night fell, they found themselves lost on the road. Jean-Claude suddenly stopped the car and attacked the woman with tear gas, a stun wand, and a cable in an attempt to subdue her. Despite being caught off guard, the woman fought back fiercely and managed to escape the vehicle. Jean-Claude chased after her but stopped when she begged for mercy. After his plan failed, Jean-Claude begged for forgiveness and used a familiar excuse with the woman, claiming that his lymphoma was acting up, causing his erratic behavior. The woman agreed not to talk about the incident. As the police looked into Jean-Claude, they began to see him as a con man and a manipulator. When Jean-Claude awoke from his coma, he was immediately approached by the police, who wanted him to confess, but Jean-Claude chose to remain silent. With a blank expression, he stared into space, reluctant to speak when the police asked him about the events of January 9th, the fire, the shooting of Antoine and Caroline, Florence's serious injuries, and the discovery of his dead parents. Despite repeated questioning, Jean-Claude revealed nothing. The truth about Jean-Claude's life was finally revealed to the police. That's when he decided to break his silence. The reasons for this sudden change are still unclear, but it marked the beginning of him speaking out. On the evening of January 9th, Jean-Claude and his wife Florence spent a typical night at home. After putting their children to bed, they went to their bedroom. However, Jean-Claude's memories of that night are unclear until he recalls a disturbing scene, finding his wife lying in a pool of blood on their bed, with a bloodied rolling pin in his hand. Confused about what had happened, Jean-Claude claims he didn't remember if an argument had occurred. He then went to sleep beside his wife's body. The next morning, he woke up and prepared breakfast for their children, Caroline and Antoine. He served them cereal and joined them to watch TV. When the children asked about their mother, Jean-Claude told them she was unwell and needed to rest. After breakfast, Jean-Claude urged Caroline to go upstairs to her bedroom. Jean-Claude then took out a .22 caliber rifle, equipped with a silencer, and shot his 7-year-old daughter Caroline in the back of the head, killing her. His son Antoine also met a similar tragic end. After the shootings, Jean-Claude left the house and went about his daily routine, appearing normal to those around him. He bought newspapers and watched television at home. However, Jean-Claude received a phone call from his parents inviting him to lunch, which he accepted. Jean-Claude drove to his parents' home and joined them for lunch. After lunch, Jean-Claude asked his father to go upstairs with him, saying Jean-Claude needed help with a faulty boiler pipe. Jean-Claude's elderly father checked the pipe at Jean-Claude's request. However, Jean-Claude shot his father in the back. He then went downstairs to his mother and shot her. Before leaving, Jean-Claude also shot the family dog. During the trial, when questioned about this, Jean-Claude showed a hint of remorse. Overcome with emotion, he broke down in tears, explaining that the dog was cherished by his children and reminded him of Caroline. This moment led Jean-Claude to decide to return home and take his own life. But his plan did not go as intended. Jean-Claude's former lover gave him 990,000 francs for an investment scheme, which he used to support himself. Jean-Claude told many people, including Florence's relatives and family, about the high returns from his investments, and they trusted him because they knew him. Jean-Claude gradually amassed a large sum of money from those who trusted him. To avoid detection by the tax authorities and others, Jean-Claude transferred the money to accounts in his own name in Geneva. Meanwhile, Jean-Claude managed the family finances, keeping his fraudulent activities a secret from Florence. Eventually, the inevitable happened, and it was time for Jean-Claude to face the consequences of his actions. As expected, those who had invested with Jean-Claude began to demand their money back, along with the promised returns. Despite having amassed over 2 million francs, Jean-Claude spent it all as soon as he had it to cover immediate expenses, leaving Jean-Claude with little to no savings. The inevitable day came when Jean-Claude had to confess the truth to Florence and the others who had entrusted him with money. Jean-Claude could no longer maintain the lie he had created. Feeling trapped and overwhelmed, he believes that ending his family's lives is a way to protect them from the consequences of his fraud. Jean-Claude then plans to commit suicide to avoid facing the reality of his situation. On June 23, 1996, Jean-Claude's trial began. Throughout the trial, Jean-Claude remained largely silent, sitting behind a glass partition with police on either side. On July 2, the court delivered its verdict. Jean-Claude was found guilty of murdering his wife, children, and parents. He was given a life sentence with no chance of parole for 22 years. After serving time in prison, Jean-Claude claimed to have become a devout Christian and expressed remorse for his actions. In 2019, Jean-Claude requested to be released from prison to live in a convent, where he could spend the rest of his life in repentance. The judge agreed to Jean-Claude's request. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Grace Mill Lane. Grace Emmy Rose Mill Lane was born on December 2, 1996 in Wickford, Essex, to her parents Gillian and David Mill Lane. She was the youngest of her 3 siblings. She was known as a lovely, outgoing, cheerful daughter who thought about her family and loved creativity and art. Because her family was so close to her, Grace maintained daily contact with her siblings and parents, even when she rented a house near her school, Lincoln University, where she studied advertising and marketing. In 2018, Grace Mill Lane, 21, graduated with a bachelor's degree in advertising and marketing. Like most young people at that age, Grace decided that she would take a year off before settling into her career. She decided to travel to South America before going to New Zealand. She embarked on a 10-month solo adventure in October 2018. She initially visited Peru before making her way to South America. On November 19th, Grace arrived in New Zealand and checked into the base backpackers hostel in Auckland, ready for a 2-week holiday traveling around the Upper North Island. It was in New Zealand that Grace met her Tinder match, a 28-year-old man named Jesse Kempson, on December 1st. Jesse Kempson was born on December 28, 1991, in Lower Hutt, New Zealand, but he grew up in Wellington. His parents separated when he was young, and for a time, he was raised by his grandparents. He moved to Australia with his mother as a teenager, but in 2016 he returned to New Zealand and lived in a hostel in Wellington. Grace didn't know that Jesse had a darker side, a more cruel soul, in him. Jesse was known to be a very charming guy, and he used that to manipulate people. On one occasion, Jesse lied to his former landlord that he was a professional softball player, newly signed by the New Zealand national softball team, the Black Sox, and claimed that his contract money would come so he could pay the rent. That went on for 2 months. And the homeowner only learned the truth when Black Sox management announced that no one knew who Jesse was. Unfortunately, the homeowner later discovered that he had fled elsewhere without his knowledge. He also sometimes claimed to have a bachelor's degree in international law, came from a millionaire family looking to buy a top restaurant in Auckland, had connections to the New Zealand Immigration Service, and many other lies that he mentioned to everyone. In reality, Jesse was nothing more than a dreamer who could only impress people with wild lies. His former roommates in a Green Lane boarding house found Jesse disturbing and untrustworthy before he moved into the City Life apartment. On another occasion, a woman he lived with claimed he stole money from her house and ran away again, costing the City Life homeowner thousands of dollars. Jesse was an enigma to many. He lied throughout his life, and it seemed to work. He also seemed to get away with it time and time again. Back at the dorm where Grace was staying, she was chatting happily with Jesse. Grace had no doubts and was captivated by Jesse. Grace even sent a text message to her best friend Anna back home, telling Anna that she agreed to Jesse's confession. Since it was Saturday and her 22nd birthday was the next day, Grace didn't want to be alone and decided to go out. She decided it was time to meet Jesse. Jesse lived just 5 minutes away from where Grace lived, and Grace thought they needed to get to know each other a little better. On that special day, Grace got ready for her big evening and felt nothing but excitement and optimism. Grace left the base backpackers hostel in Auckland at 6 p.m. On the evening of December 1st, she wore a black dress and carried a small handbag. Little did she know that her night would take a devastating turn. Initially, the evening seemed to have gone well as she and Jesse visited the Blue Stone Room and left together around 9:30. However, when her 22nd birthday arrived the next day, Grace did not respond to birthday wishes from family and friends. This unusual silence caused anxiety and panic, especially among her family members. It was unusual for Grace not to keep in touch as she regularly updated her family about her trip and shared photos of her adventures. Therefore, Grace's parents contacted Auckland police and reported her missing on December 5th. Thanks to an extensive network of CCTV cameras across the city and reports from witnesses, police were able to quickly track Grace's movements on the night she disappeared. They also identified the man with her, Jesse Kempson, who became a key figure in the investigation. Jesse stopped at the Blue Stone Room, a local bar next to the City Life Hotel where he was staying, on the night he was supposed to meet Grace. About half an hour before the scheduled meeting, Jesse was seen drinking 4 bottles of beer, sitting alone in a bar. Meanwhile, Grace arrived early at the Sky Tower, the location they had agreed upon. This location was chosen because of its high visibility and beauty. Sky Tower is a famous landmark in New Zealand's largest city and can be easily recognized from afar. When Jesse arrived, the two quickly recognized each other and greeted each other warmly, with Jesse hugging her as she smiled and approached him. They then went to a restaurant and burger bar on the first floor of the adjacent Sky City complex. Their entire time together at Sky City was captured on camera, showing Jesse and Grace chatting while riding the escalator to Andy's Burger and Bar. When they arrived, they ordered cocktails from the bartender and sat at the table to talk. They left the bar after an hour and a half and walked to a nearby Mexican restaurant. Over a period of time, they consumed a large number of drinks, including 2 pitchers of margaritas and a pitcher of sangria. They then moved to the Blue Stone Room, where Jesse had previously been drinking alone. At 8:40 p.m., Jesse gently kissed Grace. This marked the beginning of several shared kisses that took place over the next hour. During this time, there were brief interruptions, once when Jesse walked away for a moment, and another time when Grace checked her phone, as well as when she sent her last text to her friend, Anna. Jesse eventually walked away, took out his phone, and left a message on Grace's Facebook profile, saying she looked beautiful and radiant. Unbeknownst to him, this seemingly harmless act eventually turned the detectives towards him. Around 9:30 p.m., Jesse and Grace left the venue, walked toward the City Life Hotel lobby, and took the elevator to room 308. What happened while Jesse and Grace were in the hotel room is unknown. What is confirmed is that Jesse killed her. At 1:30 a.m., Grace's body was brought into room 308. Following the discovery, police determined that Grace had never left the building and that Jesse had chosen not to seek emergency assistance following the death of Grace. After Grace's death, Jesse conducted numerous internet searches using his cell phone. His online searches included searching for the terms hottest fire and Waitakere Range. Waitakere was the area where Jesse later tried to bury Grace's body in a shallow grave. Jesse also browsed a website to find video content. In addition to these actions, Jesse also took 7 intimate and explicit photos of Grace's body after her death. These photos included close-ups and posed shots that he arranged to take. The next morning, while Grace's body was still in room 308, Jesse sent a message to a woman he met on Tinder to go on a date the same day. Jesse's actions continued and he was recorded on CCTV as he went to an entertainment store to buy a suitcase and a supermarket to buy cleaning supplies. After these purchases, he rented a red Toyota hatchback and went out in the afternoon to meet the woman from Tinder at a bar in Ponsonby called RRY, while Grace's body remained in his room. On December 2nd, Jesse returned to his hotel room around 5:45 p.m. and rented a carpet cleaning machine, saying he needed it to remove a red wine stain. Then, he parked the rental car outside the hotel, took the luggage cart from the front desk, and went upstairs. He returned with the cart, which then contained 2 large suitcases. He loaded his luggage into the car and moved it to a nearby parking lot. Unbeknownst to the others, one of the suitcases, a silver one, contained Grace's body, while the other suitcase was used as bait to avoid arousing suspicion. Throughout the day, security cameras recorded Jesse changing clothes multiple times. Early the next morning, around 6:15 a.m., Jesse was seen leaving the hotel and driving away, stopping briefly to buy a shovel at a store outside of town. On December 7, 2018, Grace's father, David Millane, traveled to New Zealand to make a sincere appeal for information about his daughter's disappearance. A detective identified Jesse as a person of interest after Grace's mother noticed he had sent her a Facebook message at 9:29 p.m. on December 1st, just 11 minutes before Jesse and Grace left Blue's stone room and went to his room. During Detective Diana Levinson's initial questioning, Jesse claimed that he met Grace but broke up with her at 10 p.m. on Saturday, and that was the last time he saw her. However, detectives obtained CCTV footage from the hotel, which proved Jesse was lying. At the second interview, Jesse was forced to admit to killing Grace, but he claimed it was a sexual accident after she asked him to strangle her in an attempt to make the experience more pleasurable. After the interview, he was arrested and led police to the location of Grace's body. The body was discovered about 4 p.m. on December 9th in Waitakere Ranges Regional Park, off Scenic Drive. An autopsy was conducted on December 10th. An autopsy showed Grace had been strangled and bruises on her body showed she had been restrained. Jesse's trial began in Auckland on November 4, 2019. Jesse claimed Grace's death was an accident caused by rough sex gone wrong, but the jury rejected this explanation and found him guilty. Jesse Kempson had been convicted of murder on November 22, 2019, at the age of 28. During his trial, it had become clear that he had a history of making women feel extremely uncomfortable, especially those he had met or communicated with on Tinder. 8 months before meeting his victim, Jesse had dated another British tourist on Tinder and had taken her back to his motel room in Oakland. When she had refused to have sex with him, he had assaulted her while she had been crying and frozen in bed with fear. The female tourist had kept the incident a secret until she had recognized Jesse in the media after he had been charged with murder. Jesse's online interactions with another woman had also raised concerns. He had shared explicit messages where he had detailed his sexual preferences and had explained why he had them. It was believed that his desire to control and dominate might have contributed to Grace's death. In a separate trial, Jesse had been convicted of assaulting his ex-girlfriend. He had assaulted her, had threatened her with a butcher knife, and had forced her to perform humiliating acts. Jesse had claimed that he had been sent by the CIA to kill her, displaying a disturbing pattern of behavior. Throughout the trial, Jesse had shown no remorse for his actions and had refused to accept responsibility. On February 21, 2020, Jesse had received a sentence of life in prison with a minimum of 17 years without parole. The tragic events surrounding Grace's story had highlighted the need for increased safety measures for travelers, especially young women hoping to explore the world. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Dawn Hatcheney. Dawn Marie Hatcheney was born on December 5, 1969, in Seattle, Washington. She is the eldest child and only daughter of Donald Hatcheney and Diana Parle. Her father worked in a shipyard, while her mother was a homemaker. Dawn grew up with her 3 brothers, Dennis, Darren, and Derek, in Bremerton, Washington. Dawn developed a strong faith from an early age. According to her mother, she accepted God into her life at the age of 4. However, her childhood was also challenging. Her parents struggled with anxiety and depression, which often led to frequent conflicts at home. When Dawn was about 11 years old, her mother, Diana, left the family for another man. This new relationship resulted in the birth of another child. However, the relationship did not last, and Diana eventually returned to the family, bringing her newborn child with her. Despite these hardships, Dawn did well in school. She worked hard to achieve good grades and overcome her challenges. Her hard work paid off when she entered the prestigious Scripps National Spelling Bee at age 12. This achievement not only led her to the White House, but also gave her the opportunity to meet former President Ronald Reagan. Dawn graduated as valedictorian from Bremerton Christian School in 1988 and then attended Northwest College of the Assemblies of God Church in Seattle. During her college years, she met Nick Hatcheney, and they quickly formed a close relationship. However, Dawn's friends were concerned when she called Nick her other half after only a few dates, as they worried that Nick's assertive personality might not be a good fit for her. They wanted Dawn to find someone who would be unwaveringly supportive and emotionally committed. Nick grew up in Poulsbo, Washington, and his childhood shared some similarities with Dawn's. However, his family life was difficult. His father, Dan, was often distant and busy with work, leaving Nick feeling neglected. Nick's mother, Sandra, was busy with home daycare and foster care, which left Nick feeling like he was not a priority to her. He even felt that his mother favored his biological siblings and adopted children over him, leading Nick to believe that she hated him. Nick struggled with the emotional distance between his parents, especially his mother's long-term depression and his father's lack of attention. As a result, Nick lacked emotional support and connection from his family, which had a profound impact on his life. Despite his isolation, Nick found comfort and faith in the Bible and Christianity, which boosted his confidence during his teenage years but occasionally led to social isolation due to his growing self-assurance. Nick and Dawn first met in college. Initially, Dawn's friends found it strange that she liked Nick because his personality was completely different from hers. She was outgoing and confident, while Nick was not. However, as Dawn spent more time with Nick, she began to change. She was no longer the confident, independent, and driven person she once was. Instead, she became shy and indecisive, often agreeing with Nick's decisions even when they were not right for her. Although their relationship seemed unhealthy, their love for each other remained strong. Nick proposed to Dawn on Alki Beach in 1990, and they were married on April 20, 1991. As newlyweds, they moved to Bremerton, where Dawn worked as a loan officer and Nick became a youth pastor at Christ Community Church on Bainbridge Island near Seattle. Nick had always aspired to be a youth pastor at Christ Community Church, where he had previously had a good relationship with a pastor named Smith. However, Nick gradually drifted away from Smith when he found doctrinal agreement with Pastor Robert Billy Craig. Robert saw in Nick as nothing more than a tool to carry out his plan to overthrow Smith and take complete control of the church as senior pastor. Meanwhile, in 1997, Dawn and Nick faced housing problems due to frequent moves, living in houses they had renovated and sold. Dawn dreamed of having a family and a stable life. To solve this problem, Nick found a house in need of repair in East Bremerton and planned to move in, renovate it, and make it their home. However, the purchase and repair of the house put Nick and Dawn in debt. Although their relationship appeared perfect, with Dawn being Nick's supportive and accommodating wife, there were hidden problems that no one saw. Dawn even joked that if she and Nick broke up, Nick would stay with her instead of moving back to his parents' house. Meanwhile, Nick continued to borrow money from church members, putting him further into debt. He embarked on an ambitious project to start a Christian youth camp. Although the project was financially taxing, Nick committed to it because he had a strong desire to do so. Nick's story was closely related to Sandy Glass, a parishioner of Christ Community Church. When Nick was trying to find the right land to build his youth camp, Sandy confirmed once again that he had great ambitions. Sandy Glass's life had been full of ups and downs. She had faced many hardships in her life. Her first boyfriend died of an unknown illness, her father died in a construction accident, and her brother struggled with drug addiction. She married Jimmy, a carpenter, but their financial situation was strained because the family depended entirely on Jimmy's income while Sandy stayed home to care for the children. Sandy also struggled with her spending habits, often living beyond her means. This led to frequent arguments between her and Jimmy. These arguments sometimes caused Jimmy to express his frustration by yelling or withdrawing from the situation. To resolve their marital conflicts, Sandy and Jimmy sought help from the church and attended marriage counseling sessions coordinated by Nick. Nick had been the church's marriage counselor for many years. However, some parishioners filed complaints with Pastor Robert about Nick's counseling style. They were upset that Nick often asked personal questions and ignored other important issues. His discussions often focused on sexual issues, ignoring other aspects of marriage. Despite this, church members trusted Nick because he had the support of their former pastor, Smith. They felt that Nick would not have been entrusted with this role if he were not trustworthy. In the fall of 1997, Pastor Robert replaced Smith as senior pastor. Smith and his wife then left to do missionary work in Africa. Jimmy's parents, who were also church members, disagreed with his decision to seek church counseling. They were skeptical about Nick's qualifications and experience in guiding their son's marriage. When Nick focused primarily on Sandy, they became even more concerned because they felt he should focus on both of them equally. The relationship between Nick and Sandy went beyond the boundaries of a normal mentoring relationship. They spent too much time talking on the phone, meeting at church, and even outside. This made Jimmy's parents feel that their relationship was inappropriate as they interacted frequently and acted intimately. Pastor Robert's wife, Pamela, also noticed Nick's behavior and spoke to him privately. She expressed her concerns about his inappropriate behavior and advised him to focus on his own marriage. When complaints about Sandy and Nick's relationship arose, Robert had to intervene. He warned Sandy that her relationship with Nick was unacceptable and needed to end immediately. However, Sandy felt that she had a special connection with Nick. She wrote a letter to Robert, expressing her anger and frustration. In the letter, she stated that she felt Robert did not trust her. The relationship between Sandy and Nick had a negative impact on those around them. Dawn and Jimmy, along with Jimmy and Sandy's children, felt hurt by this. At one point, one of their children told Jimmy that Sandy and Nick had talked about Nick becoming their new father when Jimmy died. At church, Dawn began to share her grief with her friends. She told them about her financial situation and her desire to have children, but Nick was against the idea. By the end of 1997, Nick was romantically involved with several women besides Sandy. He spent time with them in private and on phone calls that lasted for hours. However, Sandy dreamed of the beautiful future she hoped to have with Nick. She encouraged him to invest more in the plan to open a youth camp and develop a romantic relationship with her. She believed that both of them were brought together by fate. A group of women in the congregation had tried to clear things up with Dawn, letting her know that the problems in her marriage with Nick had not been her fault, but rather Nick himself. However, her life had not turned out the way she had expected when she had married him. Back on Christmas, Dawn had woken up feeling unwell. Still, she and Nick had decided to visit her family and spend the day together. Later that evening, they had gone to Smith's house and spent time with his family. Early the next morning, the 26th, Nick had planned to go hunting with Lindsay Smith's daughter and her friends. Before leaving, Nick had met his friends at the Hood Canal Bridge in Jefferson County. After a few hours in the woods without catching anything, they had decided to return and have breakfast at a local diner around 9 a.m. While everyone was eating, Nick had suddenly become concerned and said that Dawn and he had not opened their Christmas presents. Around 9:30 a.m., Nick had left the diner and returned home. At 10 a.m., he had discovered that his wife had died in a fire. Investigators had discovered that the fire had initially started in Nick and Dawn's bedroom due to a faulty space heater. The space heater had burned fiercely and quickly spread due to the presence of newspapers and wrapping paper in the room. The situation had been made worse by the presence of multiple propane tanks on the floor. There had been a surprising detail in the story. Less than an hour earlier, Nick had told his friends at the diner that he and Dawn had not opened their Christmas presents. However, when he had spoken to the authorities, he had said that they had opened the presents the night before. Nick had explained that his wife, Dawn, had been feeling unwell and had gone to bed. He also had said he had received a propane tank as a Christmas gift. Because they had frequently renovated their home, they had to use a space heater during the winter. This type of heater often lacks modern safety features, leading to fires and deaths. The police had found no evidence that Nick's story had been false. As a local pastor, Nick had been well respected in the community and there had been no reason to suspect him of any involvement in his wife's death. Nick's congregation had tried to support him during what they had believed was a difficult time. Pastor Robert had suggested a way to try to ease Dawn's grief through prayer. However, Nick had rejected the idea, saying he had wanted Dawn to not experience any more pain. This rejection had surprised Pastor Robert, as Nick had previously been actively involved in church activities. including exorcisms. Mary Glass, Sandra's mother-in-law, had soon become suspicious of Nick's role in Dawn's death. She had thought that Dawn's death had not been an accident. She had urged her husband to contact the police to investigate, but this had not happened. Shortly thereafter, the police had determined that Dawn's death had been an accident and the case had been turned over to Nick's insurance company. Nick had received a large sum of money from his life insurance policy. This had been a bit strange to his friends and family, but they had later understood that Nick and Dawn's large debts and Nick's desire to build a youth camp had made him need the money. Some church members had found Nick's way of grieving for Dawn unusual, but they had not voiced their concerns because they had thought that people process grief differently. The church community then had held a celebration of Dawn's life, where family and friends had gathered to share stories about her and remember her life. During the celebration, Nick had shown remarkable composure throughout the funeral. Additionally, friends who had been helping clean Nick's house had discovered pictures of Dawn hidden in the back of a closet. This had suggested that Nick had wanted to remove memories of Dawn. Nick also had begun to show a cold and indifferent attitude towards many people, including some church members, neighbors, and friends. Nick's behavior had become even more suspicious when he had quickly developed a close relationship with Dawn's mother, Diana, under the guise of mourning his widowhood. This had shocked and outraged many. Even Pastor Robert could not stand Nick's behavior and had asked him to leave Christ Community Church. This expulsion had been a huge blow to Nick and marked the beginning of troubles in his life. On April 10, 2001, Sandy and her attorney met with the district attorney to negotiate her plea. In exchange for immunity, she had to reveal a secret that had been kept since the morning of December 26. Sandy recounted that on the morning of Dawn's death, Nick contacted her and said, "I did it." However, the conversation was interrupted by another call from the church informing her of Dawn's death. After the call ended, Sandy turned to Nick to clarify what he meant, but Nick simply said, "It's over, it's over." After several weeks, Sandy confronted Nick. At this point, he confessed to his crime. He had overdosed Dawn with Benadryl and then covered her face with a plastic bag to suffocate her. Dawn was still semi-conscious and had to watch as Nick murdered her. After making sure Dawn was dead, Nick arranged the crime scene to make it look like an accidental fire. He placed old newspapers and wrapping paper around the room, underneath Dawn's body, and placed propane tanks near the bed. He also arranged the fireplace to cause a fire in order to erase any evidence of his crime. Dawn's autopsy revealed no soot or carbon monoxide in her lungs or blood. However, this result did not accurately reflect reality because Dawn's red blood cells showed signs of carbon monoxide. The person in charge of Dawn's autopsy concluded that her death was an accidental fire, ignoring important evidence. One reason for this conclusion was that since Dawn was the wife of a pastor, it was thought that Dawn could not have been involved in any adulterous behavior. Although carbon monoxide bound to red blood cells, an autopsy revealed that Dawn did not inhale smoke. However, she had overdosed on the drug Benadryl, 5 times the normal dose. Some believe that this dose was not enough to cause respiratory failure. The pathologist also suggested that even if she had been asleep, Dawn would have reacted to the increased temperatures of the fire. Interestingly, crime scene photos showed newspapers underneath Dawn's body, but this detail was largely overlooked. Nick was finally arrested on September 12, 2001, in the Kinko's parking lot and vehemently denied any involvement in Dawn's death. Nick still faced a first-degree murder charge. His bail was set at $750,000. Sandy's testimony to investigators added to the frustration with the police over the nearly 4-year delay in considering Nick a suspect or making an arrest. Sandy cooperated with investigators because she was angry that Nick had relationships with other women in the church and felt taken advantage of. She believed that God did not approve of their relationship and that therefore Dawn's murder was against God's will. Church members who were questioned described Nick's strange behavior and inappropriate relationships. They also expressed frustration that he did not buy Dawn a tombstone after receiving the life insurance money. On September 17, 2001, Nick appeared in court and pleaded not guilty. He alleged that the church had cursed him and that Pastor Robert was a much more evil influence than the police could understand. Nick's trial then began. Nick was initially charged with first-degree murder, but the charges were amended to aggravated first-degree murder, which carried a sentence of life in prison without parole. Witnesses who testified included women who had relationships with Nick and several church members who had confided in him. They provided information that helped the jury better understand Nick. They had shared details of experiences they believed involved visions and direct messages from God, but in reality, Nick had used these to rationalize and manipulate others. Smith's daughter testified, describing how she had been introduced to Nick through her father and how Nick had taken advantage of her during her teenage years. The sexual relationship between her and Nick had begun shortly after Dawn had died and continued until she had moved away about a year later. Doctors and forensic experts had also testified, noting that Dawn's body had contained important clues regarding the events of that day. However, these clues had been ignored because Nick had been a pastor. Although there had been no signs of soot or carbon monoxide, which would have been unusual for a living, breathing person in a fire, the defense had vigorously contested these allegations. They had focused their efforts on portraying Nick's ex-partner, Sandy, as a jealous and vengeful man who had fabricated the accusations when he had discovered Nick's affairs with various women. On December 26, 2002, 5 years after Dawn's tragic death, the jury had deliberated for a day before finding Nick guilty of aggravated first-degree murder. At his sentencing hearing on February 7, 2003, Nick had addressed Dawn's friends and family, asserting his innocence but expressing remorse for his actions and sharing his sorrow for their loss. Nick had acknowledged that Dawn had deserved better treatment and had been sentenced to life in prison. However, in 2007, an appeal to the state Supreme Court had resulted in a modification of his sentence. The appeal had argued that the original charge of aggravated first-degree murder did not match Dawn's actual cause of death, as she had died from strangulation. The defense had argued that Nick did not deserve a life sentence. Ultimately, the state Supreme Court had ruled in favor of the appeal and commuted Nick's sentence to 26 years. Nick would be eligible for parole in 2025 and might be eligible for early release. Dawn had gone too soon, but not forgotten. She had chosen a life with someone she had trusted, but that had not come true. Sadly, that had led to betrayal and her heartbreaking death. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Els van Doren. Els van Doren was a 38-year-old Belgian woman married to Jan de Wilde, a jeweler. Together, they had 2 children, Vincent and Carol. Although he worked in his family's jewelry store, Els van Doren's real passion had been skydiving. She initially took up the sport with her husband in 1994, but she quickly overcame his interest as her passion for skydiving grew. Els van Doren was an experienced skydiver with 2,300 jumps. Every weekend and holiday, she spent time skydiving. In 1998, she began formation jumping, and in 2001, she became a member of an all-female skydiving team called the Divas. The team competed at the World Skydiving Championships in 2003. However, Els van Doren had to leave the team in 2004 due to a herniated disc. After recovering, Els Van Doren decided to skydive more for fun than for competition. She joined the Swartberg Parachute Club, where she met a fellow skydiver and close friend, Els Babs Klotmans, who was 26 years old and a school teacher. To avoid confusion within the club, Els Van Doren suggested the nickname Babs for her young friend. Both women were acquainted with Marcel Summers, a member of the Swartberg Parachute Club. As Els Van Doren, Babs, and Marcel became acquainted, Els Van Doren found herself developing a strong relationship with Marcel, which eventually became a romantic relationship. Even though she was married, Els Van Doren was able to keep her relationship with Marcel a secret because her family was used to her spending weekends at the skydiving club. She often visited Marcel's apartment on weekends without arousing her husband's suspicion. What Els Van Doren didn't know was that she not only shared a name with Babs, they also shared a man, Marcel. Unbeknownst to both Els Van Doren and Babs, Marcel had been secretly hooking up with both of them, devising a plan to manage his time with each of them. Friday was for Babs, while Saturday was for Els Van Doren. This arrangement worked for Marcel for a while, but it didn't last long. On Friday evening, November 10, 2006, something unexpected happened. As planned, Babs went to Marcel's residence for a weekly meeting, but what she didn't know was that Els Van Doren had also decided to surprise Marcel that night. Babs and Marcel had just finished dinner and were returning to their apartment when they met Els Van Doren, who was waiting outside the door. That night, Babs did not sleep in Marcel's bed as expected. Instead, she slept in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Marcel and her friend, Els Van Doren, were in the bedroom. While in the living room, Babs noticed Els Van Doren's parachute and skydiving equipment nearby. Feeling hurt and betrayed by her friend's actions, Babs acted in a way that would ultimately have devastating consequences. On November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Els Van Doren, Babs, and Marcel, boarded a flight over Flanders. Their plan was to jump in a four-person formation from 13,000 feet with Tom, another skydiver. During the jump, they would hold hands before leaving and opening their parachutes. Els Van Doren and Tom jumped out of the plane as scheduled, but Babs seemed to have jumped a little late. As they free fell, Babs struggled to keep up with the group. At an altitude of 9,000 feet, Marcel, Els Van Doren, and Tom decided to break formation to safely open their parachutes. That's when they realized something serious was going on. Els Van Doren's parachute wouldn't open when she pulled the rope. Remaining calm, Els Van Doren recalled her emergency training and remembered a previous experience where she had successfully deployed her reserve parachute after the main parachute failed. Els Van Doren was plummeting towards the ground at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, with only 20 seconds to perform an emergency maneuver to ensure a safe landing. Despite her best efforts, pulling the reserve parachute cord had no effect and the parachute could not open. In a state of panic, Els Van Doren continued to pull both the main parachute rope and the backup parachute rope. But nothing happened. Marcel, at an altitude of 800 meters, witnessed Els Van Doren's desperate struggle from afar. He was 300 meters above Els Van Doren, who was only 500 meters above the ground, and he knew something was wrong because her parachute had not opened. However, he was powerless to intervene and could only watch in horror. In a last-ditch effort, Els Van Doren tried to untangle her parachute in hopes of activating it, but it was too late. Her life ended. Meanwhile, in Upavbeek town, a woman was drying laundry in her garden when she heard a loud noise. She looked up and saw a person falling from the sky with a parachute, heading straight for her garden. This sight was not unusual as her house was located near a skydiving club and its landing strip. She suddenly noticed a piece of white cloth stuck to her bush. When she got closer, she saw a person lying in the bushes. She immediately called her husband, who was working in the garden, and they quickly called emergency services. Meanwhile, Marcel had landed safely and was desperately searching for Els van Doren. He spotted an ambulance and followed it to the scene where Els van Doren had landed. As he rushed towards her, he was restrained by the emergency team so they could work. Despite their efforts to resuscitate her, Els van Doren died. Marcel emphasized that Els van Doren's parachute was inoperable, pointing out that it was unusual for both the main and reserve parachutes to fail to open. He then contacted Els van Doren's husband, Jan, to tell him the news. Jan rushed to his wife's side, while Tom and Babs returned to the skydiving club to break the tragic news to the other members. The news was heartbreaking. Babs was overcome with grief, falling to her knees and crying in pain. Els van Doren's husband, Jan, went to the skydiving club to pick up her belongings. When he arrived, he met Babs, who offered to help him. However, Jan found it strange that Babs seemed to stand still with a strange grin on her face. She walked towards the dressing room with Jan following, but then suddenly locked the door, leaving Jan outside. After a long wait, Babs finally walked out carrying Els van Doren's belongings. At the scene of the accident, police found Els van Doren's parachute and helmet. The helmet had a camera that recorded her final jump. An autopsy was performed to see if Els van Doren's death was caused by any internal cause. Results showed no signs of alcohol or drugs, leading investigators to conclude that her death was a murder or suicide. This conclusion was based on the severe fractures and internal bleeding caused by the fall. Els van Doren's family suspected that she might have been murdered by someone in her own skydiving club, someone who knew how parachutes worked. As a result, club members were asked not to attend her funeral, but some of Els van Doren's close friends chose to ignore this request. The family's suffering became even greater when police revealed that Els van Doren had a secret affair with Marcel Summers that lasted more than 5 years. Jan was especially hurt when he learned that some of his club members knew about the affair, people he considered friends, but they all had kept quiet. What was even more painful was that Els van Doren had told her clubmates that she had divorced her husband, which was not true. Els van Doren had passed away just 1 day before her child Carol's 15th birthday. At the funeral, Carol gave a heartfelt speech, recalling how her family had prevented her mother from skydiving. They had longed for her to be with them, but Carol also admitted that her mother had been a unique person who wouldn't have been happy if she had given up what she loved. After the funeral, police began investigating the incident with Els van Doren's reserve parachute. They sent a skydiving expert to check the parachute and look for abnormalities. Experts quickly discovered a critical problem: the pilot chute, a small auxiliary parachute that helped deploy the main or reserve parachute, was missing. Obviously, someone had deliberately removed it. Experts also discovered that the main parachute activation cord and one of the cords connecting to the emergency parachute had been cut. During the final review of body cam footage of Els van Doren's fatal skydiving accident, an unidentified piece of red fabric was seen in front of her. Investigators were unable to identify the object as part of Els van Doren's equipment. They therefore asked OPLAB residents to thoroughly search their garden and surrounding area for the piece of red cloth and warned them to handle it carefully if found, as it could be potential evidence containing the DNA of the person responsible for sabotaging Els van Doren's parachute. Unfortunately, no one was able to find the piece of fabric. A week after Els van Doren's death, a surprising discovery was made when Babs found the pilot chute. According to Babs, she had discovered the parachute hanging from a tree while driving between OPLAB and Genk on the way back from Marcel's apartment. Instead of contacting the police directly, she told Marcel about the discovery. Marcel then called the police, who arrived at the location and found Babs visibly shaken and emotional. The police were skeptical of Babs' story, as they found it unusual that she had stumbled upon the pilot chute. Babs insisted it had been just a coincidence, explaining that she had taken a different route home and had been delayed by a slow-moving tractor. She said this delay had caused her to look up and see the parachute hanging about 20 meters above her, which she interpreted as a sign from Els van Doorn. The police were suspicious because they knew that only investigators knew that the pilot had been missing. At that time, 3 people were the main suspects in Els van Doorn's suspected murder case: her husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend Babs. Police searched Marcel's residence and eventually identified him as a suspect. They later also cleared Jan as a suspect. They then searched Babs' home and confiscated items such as her phone, laptop, and diary. In her diary, she had written down her feelings following the advice of her psychiatrist. Later, Els Klotmans, also known as Babs, was questioned by the police about her relationship with Marcel and what had happened to Els van Doorn. During the interrogation, Babs insisted she had had nothing to do with Els van Doorn's parachute. She blamed Marcel, claiming that he had often taken care of Els van Doorn's equipment when she stayed at his place on the weekends, or blamed Jan, claiming that Els van Doorn had often left her belongings at his house during the week. After the initial interrogation, Babs was released and went home. However, she did not appear for a second interview scheduled for December 20, 2006. It was later discovered that that morning she had tried to take her own life by drinking a combination of sleeping pills and antidepressants. Her mother had found her unresponsive and immediately took her to the hospital for emergency treatment. Before attempting suicide, Babs had written letters to loved ones expressing her struggle to cope with the loss of her close friend and the extreme stress of being a suspect in a murder case. After recovering, Babs had been admitted to a psychiatric hospital for 15 days for close observation. This had not been her first attempt at self-harm, as she had previously been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression. Marcel ended their relationship, believing her actions had been more a call for attention than an actual attempt to commit suicide. He thought she had taken the pill just before her mother had been due to return home, suggesting her main goal had been to divert attention from suspicion of involvement in the murder of Els van Doorn. Marcel thought the police had been trying to track down Babs and arrest her based on her lies. While still under psychiatric care, Babs had been arrested on January 11, 2007, as a suspect in the murder of Els van Doorn. When Babs appeared in court on January 19, 2007, authorities decided that she would be detained while the investigation was ongoing. Authorities asked Babs to take a polygraph test, but she refused and it was never taken. A thorough examination of Els van Doorn's parachute equipment had showed that someone had deliberately cut the parachute cord with scissors. The investigation revealed that the person responsible might have been right-handed. Babs spent 3 months in prison by March 2007, having to endure many interrogations. During questioning, she denied any wrongdoing but admitted sending anonymous letters to Els van Doorn. The letter affirmed that Els van Doorn's actions towards her family were wrong. Jan found the letter, but he interpreted it as a criticism of Els van Doorn's frequent absences due to parachuting. However, Babs' intention had been to warn Els van Doorn to end her relationship with Marcel. Babs also confessed to calling Marcel anonymously, especially when he had been with Els van Doorn. She had intended to threaten them. Investigators analyzed Babs' automatic activation device, AAD, and discovered that Babs had jumped with the rest of the team and deployed her parachute beforehand. This supposedly allowed Babs to witness events unfold from above and monitor where Els van Doorn's parachute would land. Babs could have landed and retrieved the parachute later. Babs' trial in the murder of Els van Doorn began on September 24, 2010. Babs had been quickly arrested. The prosecution felt confident that they had enough evidence to prove Babs had committed murder. They believed Babs had been motivated by jealousy because she had discovered her lover, Marcel Summers, had been having an affair with her best friend, Els van Doorn. Babs had previously told investigators that she knew Marcel preferred Els van Doren to her. The prosecution argued that Babs had wanted to eliminate Els van Doren as a rival. However, Babs' defense argued that the prosecution's case had been based on circumstantial evidence and unproven allegations. During the trial, Babs claimed that she had not seen a future with Marcel and only had an intimate relationship with him because of her low self-esteem. She even suggested that Els van Doren's daughter, Carol, might have wanted to harm her mother for being away for the weekend. However, despite her efforts to manipulate the jury and shift blame, the judge's verdict prevailed. On October 20, 2010, Babs had been convicted of murdering her friend Els van Doren and received a 30-year prison sentence. During the trial, Babs, steadfastly maintaining her innocence, had been closely monitored to prevent her from harming herself again. She later filed an appeal claiming that the police had interrogated her without a lawyer. In May 2011, her appeal was dismissed. In June 2022, after serving 12.5 years in prison, Babs was conditionally released after a third appeal and is now free. It is a pity that Els van Doren had suffered a tragic fate and that her family had suffered immense pain when the truth had been revealed. Our sincerest condolences go out to the family and loved ones of Els van Doren, who will be deeply missed. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Michelle Avila. Michelle Yvette Missy Avila was born on February 8, 1968, in Arleta, Los Angeles. She grew up in a family with a mother and 3 brothers. Michelle attended San Fernando High School with 2 of her close friends, Karen Severson and Laura Doyle. However, their friendship began to deteriorate when they entered high school. Thanks to her beauty and popularity, Michelle attracted a lot of attention from her peers, especially boys. Michelle's prominence made Karen and Laura increasingly jealous. Afterwards, a false rumor spread that Michelle had been involved with several guys who were already in relationships. This malicious gossip incited violence against Michelle outside of school. The assault was so serious that when she returned home, her parents immediately charged the ringleader of the assault, Sonia Bon, and took her to court. Michelle was scheduled to testify against Sonia in court on October 8, 1985, but unfortunately, she never got the chance. This was due to a series of events that took place in early September. A rumor that had been circulating for a year, accusing Michelle of having had an affair with her friend's boyfriend, resurfaced and caused a rift between Michelle and her best friends, Karen and Laura. The tension started when Michelle started dating a guy named Randy during their senior year. However, Michelle ended the relationship after only a month due to Randy's constant partying. Not long after the breakup, Karen started dating Randy and the two moved in together. Despite his relationship with Karen, Randy still had feelings for Michelle, which Karen discovered when she saw him flirting with Michelle. Michelle rejected Randy's advances, making it clear that she was not interested in rekindling their affair. Michelle advised Karen to reconsider her relationship with Randy and find someone better. Karen was furious, and Karen and Laura decided to confront Michelle at a neighboring park, causing rumors to spread once again. Michelle tried to reason with Karen and Laura, explaining that she would never betray their trust and that these were just false rumors from the previous year. Witnesses said Karen yelled at Michelle, threatened her with a broken beer bottle, pushed her to the ground, and slapped her before leaving with Laura. This encounter occurred just 10 days before Michelle was murdered. After the incident, Laura apologized to Michelle, and they decided to put their conflicts aside. However, Karen did not apologize to Michelle until October 1, when she finally apologized for her reaction to Michelle. Michelle was grateful for the apology because she missed her friends so much. The three friends then made plans to meet at Stonehurst Park later that day. On October 1st, 1985, Michelle told her mother that she was going out with friends and was allowed to go on the condition that she be home by 6 p.m. Michelle waited outside for Laura to pick her up. When Laura arrived, they drove around a bit before arriving at Stonehurst Park, where they parked and waited for Karen to arrive. A few minutes had passed, and Karen had driven into the parking lot with another friend named Eva, who had been sitting in the passenger seat. As soon as Karen had arrived, she had driven her car very close to Laura's car and had rolled down the window. She had started shouting at Laura, who had rolled down her window and yelled back. Michelle and Eva had watched in amazement as their friends had angrily insulted each other, but Michelle had had no idea what the argument had been about. The situation had quickly escalated as Karen had backed away and sped off, with Laura following closely behind. They had driven recklessly for 45 minutes, heading north of the city and into the mountains. Michelle and Eva had begged them to calm down and stop, but Karen and Laura had been too angry to listen. Finally, they had turned into a parking lot that had led to a forest. Laura and Karen had gotten out of the car and continued their argument. Michelle had gotten out of the car hoping to intervene and stop the fight. However, as soon as they had stepped outside, Laura and Karen had suddenly stopped arguing and had turned their attention to Michelle. They had rushed towards her, leaving Michelle wondering what would happen next. Michelle had tried to get in the car, but Karen and Laura had been standing too close, leaving her trapped. They hadn't fought physically with her, but they had been angry with Michelle. Karen and Laura had told Michelle that they had staged the entire drama to lure her into the woods, where they could confront her. Karen and Laura had accused Michelle of sleeping with their boyfriends and had revealed that it had been they who had started the rumors. Karen and Laura had shouted at Michelle, refusing to listen to her explanation. When Michelle had become confused, Karen and Laura had grabbed her, pulled her out of the car, and had forced her to follow a nearby trail into the woods. Michelle had been much smaller than the other two girls, which had left her defenseless against Karen and Laura, who had continued to push her further down. Eva had remained in the car during the initial altercation, but had eventually gotten out and followed the group at a distance. She hadn't participated in the events that had taken place in the forest and hadn't been sure why she had been there. The group had continued into the woods, out of sight from the parking lot. When they had gone far enough, Laura had stopped and turned back to Michelle, who had been crying fearfully. Laura had then punched Michelle in the face. Karen had quickly joined in, and within seconds, Michelle had been on the ground, beaten and trampled. The attack had temporarily stopped when Laura had pulled out her knife. Grabbing Michelle's hair, she had begun cutting out sections of hair. Karen had wanted to participate, so she had started pulling Michelle's hair with her hands because she hadn't had a knife. Meanwhile, Eva had watched what had happened without doing anything to intervene. After cutting and pulling Michelle's hair, Laura and Karen had used rope to tie Michelle's hands behind her back and gagged her. A nearby river had caught Laura's attention, and she had stepped into the shallow water, smiling tauntingly at Michelle and daring her to enter. When Michelle hadn't moved, Karen had helped her up, forced her toward the river, and pushed her. Michelle had fallen down the hill, her face hitting the ground, rolling towards the river with her hands tied. Laura and Karen grabbed the girl and pulled her into the water. Eva had witnessed this and had run back up the driveway. However, when she had approached the cars, she had discovered they were locked. Since Eva had been too far away to get help from others, she had started walking back down the trail. But when she had heard a terrifying scream, she had stopped walking, turned around, and had run back to her car. There, Eva had lain on the ground in the fetal position and had waited about an hour until she had seen Laura and Karen return, soaking wet and laughing. But to her alarm, they had no longer been with Michelle. Then they left the forest, got in the car with Eva, and returned home. After the incident, 4 hours later, Laura even called Michelle's mother and asked after her. Laura talked to Michelle's mother, Irene Avila, and made up a story about dropping Michelle off with 3 boys in a blue Camaro after getting gas. Laura claimed that when she returned, Michelle and the 3 boys were gone. On October 4, 1985, Michelle's body was found face down in a stream in Big Tahunva Canyon, in Angeles National Forest, by a group of hikers. They then informed the police. Upon arriving at the scene, police found that Michelle had been drowned in 8 inches of water. Her long hair was cut off and there was a 4-foot-long piece of wood lying on top of her. Police found cigarettes, beer, and men's overalls near where Michelle's body was discovered. Karen and Laura told Michelle's parents and detectives that before her disappearance, Michelle had been traveling with 3 men in a blue Camaro. This made the items around the scene seem more reasonable. This false information caused detectives to search for bogus men for 3 years. Irene Avila said she did not suspect Karen or Laura were involved in her daughter's death because they both attended Michelle's funeral. Laura sent the family a condolence card and $20. Meanwhile, Karen had been living with Michelle's family for a long time to show support and help catch the murderer. In reality, Karen just wanted to oversee the investigation and keep the detectives from suspecting her. She also slept in Michelle's bed and had dinner with her family many nights, while she herself had participated in Michelle's murder. Karen seemed haunted by the murder. She regularly visited Michelle's grave several times a week, covered her room's walls with photos of Michelle and newspaper clippings about the crime, and constantly visited the creek where Michelle's body was found. One time, Karen told Irene that she saw Michelle's ghost. Detectives had no leads and the case languished for 3 years. By July 26, 1988, Eva Carumalo, the girl who had unwittingly participated in Michelle's murder, finally decided to report everything to the police. She explained the rumors that had been circulating about Michelle, the disagreements between her, Laura, and Karen, their anger, their jealousy, and every detail of the murder she knew. It took Eva a long time to report the incident because she was threatened by Laura and Karen. They told her not to say anything about what she saw, and she feared they would kill her. Finally, in March 1990, Karen and Laura were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 15 years. The jury did not believe the murder was premeditated, so they rejected the first-degree murder charge. After serving 21.5 years, Karen was released from prison on December 9, 2011. Laura was also released from prison in December 2012 after serving 22 years. Karen attempted to write a memoir about the murder and her life in prison. However, the book did not achieve the expected success. She also planned to make a film about her story but faced opposition from Avila's family. This incident prompted the state of California to pass Missy's Law, requiring organizations that help publish criminals' works to contact victims' families about those works. Missy's story has sparked much debate about the impact of bullying, the complexities of teenage relationships, and the importance of fostering an environment of empathy and kindness. Michelle Yvette, Missy Avila's legacy will be one of resilience and hope. We hope that her memory will inspire us all to stand up against bullying, support those affected by betrayal, and work towards a future where understanding and empathy prevail. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Megan Landowski. Megan Landowski lived with her family in Portsmouth, Virginia, a bustling seaport town. Her family included her father, Chris Short, a Navy officer, her mother, Angela, and 2 other siblings. Chris Short had been transferred to a naval hospital in Portsmouth after a year stationed at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Chris's family felt relieved when they moved there. Megan Landowski, 16 years old, was the oldest in the family. When her family moved, she quickly signed up for dance classes. Megan had a deep passion for dance and showed outstanding talent from the beginning. She started with ballet and then expanded into many different genres. Megan's mother described her as a beautiful, friendly, and talented girl. Megan adapted quickly to her new learning environment at Woodrow Wilson High School. She had an attractive personality and easily made friends with her classmates. Although she attended a prestigious high school that specialized in dance, Megan wanted to attend a regular high school so she could hang out with friends in her neighborhood. She was described as vivacious and kind, with a natural tendency to connect with people. On Thursday, April 10, 2008, Megan woke up early to go to school. She chatted with her mother about the upcoming test before going to class. After saying goodbye to Angela, Megan went to school. Angela had no idea that this would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Megan's school day ended early, and she went home. Angela had told Megan that she expected Megan's call when she got home. Upon arriving, Megan left a voicemail detailing how her day went, reassuring Angela that she had returned safely, and ending by telling Angela she loved her. Then she continued to prepare lunch for herself. However, things took a terrifying and disturbing turn around 4 p.m. Megan's stepfather, Chris, returned home and found the door open. Although he didn't worry at first, he knew Megan had been warned about leaving the door open, so he trusted that she wouldn't leave it unattended like that. He called her name, but there was only silence. When he entered the kitchen, he was faced with a horrifying sight: Megan lying motionless on the floor. Chris quickly called the police and reported the incident. Local detective Doug Funkhauser suddenly received an alarming call reporting the murder of a young girl in town. Immediately, he rushed to the location of the crime, Roberts Court in Portsmouth. When he approached the scene of the crime, he saw horrifying signs. The bloodstains on the door handle were very clear. When he entered the kitchen, he discovered a gruesome scene. The body of a young girl lay on the floor, her body seriously injured. Megan had suffered multiple stab wounds on her back, neck, face, and throat, and her mouth was sealed with tape. For Detective Doug, this case was one of the most brutal cases he had ever investigated. An initial investigation revealed no signs of forced entry. However, a leaf found inside the home matched a bush outside a first-floor window, suggesting that the killer may have entered through that window. In the upstairs bedroom, signs of a struggle were evident on the bed. Megan's underwear was on the floor, and a box of duct tape was found under the left corner of the bed, appearing to match the tape used to bind Megan's hands and face. Forensic experts found blood on the tape and other items, which were collected for further analysis, including pillows, sheets, and blankets. Additional forensic testing indicated that the bedroom was the scene of the sexual assault, as traces of the killer's semen were found on Megan's comforter and underwear. These findings suggested that Megan had been assaulted in the bedroom before the attack downstairs. Megan was found with a large number of injuries, 43 stab wounds, including 11 post-mortem. The forensic team also reported that Megan was naked from the waist down, with her hands bound behind her back with duct tape. The murder weapon was determined to be a missing kitchen knife. Investigators later found the knife in the sink and determined that the initial attack had occurred in the bedroom, but Megan had somehow escaped down the stairs. Investigators discovered that the perpetrator left footprints during the crime and then washed his hands in the kitchen sink. A second knife used in the crime was discovered in a nearby drain. Detectives quickly searched the neighborhood for witnesses, but no one provided any useful information. The killer appeared to have escaped undetected during the day. After the shock of their daughter's murder, Angela and Chris quickly alerted the police to their suspicions regarding the identity of the killer. They suspected an old acquaintance with a troubled past and believed he may be involved in the case. This person is Robert Hickey, a former colleague of Chris's in the Navy who had sexually assaulted Megan when she was 16. Chris and Robert had worked together as technicians and had become close friends, often inviting Robert and his family to their home. Megan's behavior changed dramatically after the abuse. She became withdrawn, and her grades began to decline. Chris noticed the change and asked her what was wrong, but she was initially reluctant to talk about it. Eventually, Megan confided in Chris, revealing that Robert had been sexually assaulting her in secret. Chris was furious and immediately cut off ties with the Hickeys. He also reported the abuse to the authorities. Around the same time, Megan's parents filed a lawsuit against Robert, just 5 months before she was murdered. The trial is pending, and Megan is expected to testify against him. Robert has a lot at stake, including his reputation and his freedom. Megan expressed concern that Robert might try to harm her to prevent her from testifying, and unfortunately, it appears that her fears have come true. When police searched Robert's home, they did not find any direct evidence linking him to Megan's murder. However, upon closer inspection of his computer, they discovered that he had attempted to erase the hard drive. Investigators were able to recover a recently deleted file containing sexually explicit images of minors. This discovery led to Robert being charged with possession of child pornography and becoming the prime suspect in Megan's murder. He was brought in for questioning, and authorities hope that he will confess to the crime. Robert was visibly nervous throughout the interview, but he insisted that he was at the Navy base on the day of Megan's murder. He denied any involvement and claimed he had not left the base. However, after verifying his alibi with his colleagues, the police discovered a gap in his timeline, raising the possibility that he might have been involved in the murder. The police obtained surveillance footage from the base but found no evidence that Robert had left. Despite this, he remained a suspect. To investigate further, a DNA sample was taken from Robert to compare with the DNA found at the crime scene. The results showed no match, ruling out Robert as the killer. This discovery left the police without any leads or suspects, leaving them frustrated. They then turned their attention to Chris, who had discovered Megan's body. After taking a DNA sample from Chris, he was quickly cleared. Megan's family members, including her younger brother, Corey, were also ruled out as suspects. The autopsy revealed that the murder was extremely brutal, indicating that the perpetrator had used extreme violence against Megan. Given Megan's popularity and gentle nature, it was difficult to narrow the investigation based on hostile relationships. This made the identity of the killer even more mysterious. The investigation into Megan's case did not produce any suspects. Detectives focused on Megan's life at school and interviewed each of her friends. Megan's best friend was interviewed but did not provide any useful information. Police then spoke to other friends and acquaintances from Woodrow Wilson High School and learned that Megan had dated a few people but nothing too serious. Although these men did not appear to be suspects, police asked them to provide DNA samples as a precaution. Meanwhile, experts retested DNA from the crime scene, which suggested that the killer was likely an African American male. For 6 months, no major developments were made, but that changed when a helpful classmate provided valuable information, a list of boys with whom Megan had occasionally flirted. Police looked through the list and found that they had spoken to all of the boys on the list, except for one, a 17-year-old named Robert Lee Barnes. Megan and Robert Barnes were both in the performing arts program at Churchill High School. Megan confided in her friend that she believed Robert might have a crush on her. At school, Robert was considered an excellent violinist, and as a student, he had always earned good grades, exhibited exemplary behavior. and had no disciplinary problems. As one of Megan's friends, Robert visited Megan's home several times, showing respectful behavior during these visits, and Megan's parents were very fond of him. When the police questioned Robert about Megan, he described her as a kind and pleasant person and was shocked that someone would want to harm her. He mentioned that he and Megan had attended shows together and occasionally hung out. However, towards the end of the interview, Robert's demeanor changed when he was asked to provide a DNA sample. Unlike Megan's other classmates, who were cooperative with the request, Robert hesitated and then refused, which aroused the suspicion of the investigators. Robert said that his mother did not allow the DNA test, but the police informed him that his parents' permission was not required because he was almost 18 years old. However, Robert still refused. This refusal made the investigators feel uncomfortable and suspicious that something was wrong with Robert. Therefore, after the interview ended, the investigators suggested that he talk to his mother and try again. The day after the initial investigation, Robert contacted the authorities to request a meeting. When asked if he had obtained his mother's permission, he replied that he had not, but he had given them a piece of his chewing gum as a DNA sample. Robert removed the gum from his mouth, placed it in a rubber glove, and gave it to the investigators. Despite this, the investigators remained suspicious of Robert. The DNA lab then contacted the detective to inquire about the sample's source. After confirming that Robert had indeed placed the gum in the glove, the lab questioned whether he had been continuously monitored while providing the gum. This investigation was prompted by the surprising fact that the DNA on the gum matched that of a woman. It turned out that Robert had switched the gum he was chewing with another piece before handing it to the investigators. On October 23, 2008, Robert was called in for questioning again, this time with his mother. When confronted with the DNA findings, Robert was asked about the chewing gum. He made a critical mistake by stating, "This happened on Thursday." Up until that point, none of the individuals interviewed by the police knew the exact date and time of the murder. When the officers pointed this out to Robert, he provided an implausible explanation. According to Robert, on that Thursday, Megan had asked him to visit her home. Upon his arrival, Robert claimed to have found Megan being held at gunpoint by a masked individual. The alleged attacker held the gun to Robert, forcing him to tie Megan up. Robert then fabricated a story that he had been compelled to sexually assault Megan. He further claimed that they all went downstairs, where the attacker stabbed Megan after obtaining a knife. Ultimately, Robert stated that the attacker had forced him to inflict an injury on himself to ensure his blood would be present at the crime scene. Robert fabricated a false story to portray himself as the victim and to explain away any incriminating evidence. However, the police did not believe his account. When presented with evidence of footprints found at the scene, the investigator asked Robert why only his footprints were found and not those of the person he claimed had attacked him. Robert's mother intervened, telling Robert to stop talking and asserting that Robert was a good and innocent person. The police then took a DNA sample from Robert. The DNA analysis showed a match between Robert's DNA and the DNA found at the crime scene. As a result, Robert Barnes was arrested for the murder of Megan Landowski. According to police, Robert likely broke into the house through a window that afternoon, surprising Megan in her bedroom. He then attacked her, and when she tried to escape downstairs, he chased her, stabbing her multiple times with a kitchen knife, even after she was dead. After the crime, Robert left the scene and continued his life as if nothing had happened. Investigators believe that Robert became unhealthily obsessed with Megan, who only wanted a friendship. When Robert's romantic advances were rejected, he turned to coercion, which led to a tragic end. In September 2009, Robert accepted a plea deal that allowed him to be tried as a juvenile, despite having just turned 18. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and aggravated sexual assault. As a result, Robert Lee Barnes was sentenced to 42 years in prison and is currently serving his sentence at Red Onion State Prison in Wise County, Virginia. Regardless of the motive behind Robert's actions, whether it was love, lust, bitterness, or the pain of rejection, none of these reasons justify his horrific crimes against the person he claimed to love and care for. Robert chose the path of destruction, taking the life of an innocent person and ruining his own life.